All the wanderers and soldiers at the temporary camp were in a good mood as they celebrated their victory. Countless campfires burned, lighting up the night as they ate their meal and bragged about the number of monsters they had killed during the battle. Contrary to the festive mood in the camp, the people in the command center had solemn looks on their faces as they seriously discussed how they'd deal with the aftermath of the battle. Before anything else, I would like to thank everyone for playing their role properly during this mission, 13 said. I just looked at the report an hour ago, and aside from having hundreds of people suffering light and moderate injuries, no one was seriously hurt or died in battle. The teenage boy glanced at everyone with a smile. But the battle is not over yet, 13 stated before tapping his communicator. A projection of the resources that were used during the earlier battle appeared in front of everyone. We have exhausted 90% of our missile stockpiles and over 60% of our cannon shells, 13 said in a serious tone. Currently, we are in no position to pursue our opponents because we lack ammunition. The faces of everyone inside the room instantly became solemn after seeing the report that their supreme commander had presented to them. However, all is not lost. 13 glanced at his grandfather, who was swirling the wine in his cup. Although it would take time for us to resupply and create more ammunition, there's a faster way to resume our combat readiness. As for the details, I would like to ask my grandfather, Arthur Leventis, to say his proposal to all of you. When all the eyes inside the room shifted to Arthur, the old man placed down his cup on the table and smirked. The Leventis family have developed a technology that allows us to detect mineral deposits over a wide area, Arthur explained, surprising everyone in the room. This means that by tomorrow, all of us could immediately start mining operations, allowing us to mine Imperiums, which we can use to charge Imperium power cells. Aside from that, precious metals like palladium can be mined hand in hand, further boosting the speed of our ammunition production. However, in order to make this happen, I propose that we split any and all resources by 25%. This means that the Dvalin Federation, the Central Government, the Aldebaran Alliance, and the Leventis family will have an equal share of resources. Of course, if you don't like this proposal, then we will just mine on our own and let you guys mine your own resources as well. Wendell frowned after hearing this. In his point of view, this division of resources was unfair. But before he could say anything, Arthur raised a finger. If the Dvalin Federation doesn't agree with this proposal, then the Leventis family will immediately leave the Rigel continent, Arthur stated. I will also be dragging this no-good grandson with me and leave you all to defend this northern regions by yourselves. Lawrence chuckled after hearing Arthur's statement. Well, if Zion and the Leventis family are leaving, the central government will leave as well, Lawrence commented. We still have to go to Signy anyway to help with their defense against the Jinn invasion. If the Leventis family and the central government plan to leave, then I will be going as well, Trevor Remington said. I only participated because I have a feeling that Zion has what it takes to become the supreme commander. You bastards. Wendell couldn't help but crush the glass of champagne in his hand, shattering it completely. All of you are in this together, right? Have you all teamed up to pressure the Dvalin Federation into agreeing to your demands? Nonsense, Arthur replied. We don't have the time to scheme with each other right after the war ended. I'm just stating facts. If the Dvalin Federation wants everything, then we're out of here. Fortunately, none of our people died, so we won't ask the Dvalin Federation to compensate us. The only takeaway that we will bring home with us is the fact that we have given the world hope. Aren't you glad? We allowed you to reclaim the northern lands without asking for anything in return. Now, if you're unwilling to share anything, then we will leave. We're not volunteers, and the Leventis family is not a charity organization. The room, which had been lively a while ago, immediately became tense as the central government, the Aldebaran Alliance, and the Leventis family waited for Wendell to agree to the 25% split to all forces. Wendell, who was fuming out of anger, glanced at the teenage boy who was seated beside his grandfather. 13 was casually sipping on his fruit juice while swiping through the different news articles recently published in his communicator. News of the Alliance's victory was now known to everyone, and yet the world still wanted to consume more information regarding it from the media. 13 didn't even need to think if Wendell would accept his grandfather's proposal or not. Right now, if the Alliance left the Dvalin Federation to fend for themselves, all the fame and glory they received after winning the war would disappear without a trace. Not only that, but they would no longer have the ability to defend the lands that they had reclaimed from the Majins and Majins. Fine. Wendell sighed, before leaning on his chair. You bastards win this time. Good. Arthur nodded, before tapping his communicator. The map of the North appeared in front of everyone, and the locations of the mineral deposits blinked on the map. It showed what kind of mineral could be found where, as well as the volume of the resources that were present under the ground. Naturally, everyone's gaze is locked on the Imperium mines, which contain the most sought-after ore in the world. Don't worry. Since I have everyone's interest in mind, I already ordered my people to start mining the 3 Imperium mines closest to us, Arthur said with a smile, making Wendell almost cough up blood then and there. The sooner we restock our ammunition, the sooner we're ready to protect ourselves from the Jinn counterattack, 13 commented. Although we didn't see the corpse of the broodmother because it was taken by the Centipede King, I believe that it is already dead. As for the Wyvern King, it had received serious injuries and might have perished when it escaped. But we cannot confirm this, so we can just assume that it will be out of commission for a month or 2 before it recovers from its injuries. We need to use that precious time to stockpile our ammunition so that we can still clash with them a second time. Wendell frowned after hearing 13's words. He thought that they would just hold their line and defend the North, preventing the Majins from retaking it. However, the teenage boy was saying that they would launch another attack. This time, they would be heading deeper into enemy territory, which would become very dangerous even for them. Can't we just defend the North? Wendell asked. Must we challenge them again? We need to attack so that the North will be defended, 13 replied. Don't forget, they still have the Earth Dragons. They just can't move from the center because they are protecting something very precious to them. Something very precious? Lawrence asked, are you talking about the dimensional gate where the Earth Dragons came from? 13 nodded. Yes, we need to make them understand that fighting against us is not in their best interest. Only by doing this can we reach a compromise with them. Wait, are you saying that we're going to negotiate with the Jinns? Wendell looked at the teenage boy in disbelief. Are you serious? Why can't we negotiate with them? 13 arched an eyebrow. Have you not seen Jinns and Majins forming a mutual partnership with each other? Of course, I know about that, Wendell stated. But can we really reach an agreement with them? What if they backstab us? 13 emptied his fruit juice and placed the glass back on the table. Negotiations can only be achieved if both parties are willing to negotiate, 13 said. Right now, the Jinns and Majins have no reason to negotiate with us. However, if we pose a real threat to them, they will be willing to compromise. And the way to do that is to attack the dimensional gate that the Earth Dragons are protecting. So, in 2 months, we need to be ready for a massive onslaught that will hit them at the heart of their territory. As long as you follow my plans, you will no longer have to worry about defending the North because the Jinns and Majins will not dare to attack it. Besides, we can't stay here in the Rigel continent forever to help you defend the North. Signy also needs our help, so we need to finish this war as soon as possible. Everyone in the room, with the exception of Wendell and the representatives of the Dvalin Federation, nodded their heads in agreement. Knowing that they were right, Wendell sighed for the second time before nodding his head. Fine, Wendell nodded before shifting his gaze in the teenage boy's direction. Hey, Brad, can you assure us that the Earth Dragons will negotiate if we follow your plan? 13 crossed his arms over his chest and smiled evilly. If you follow my plan, I will assure you that they will be begging us to negotiate with them, 13 stated. In fact, they may even take the initiative to negotiate with us if you guys do everything as I say. Arthur and Hans glanced at the teenage boy, and for a brief moment, they felt pity for the Jinns and Majins. Why? Because if their hunch was right, Zion would not only milk the Alliance for what they were worth, but he would also blackmail the Earth Dragons to do him some favors, which would benefit him in more ways than one. After the deal had been sealed the Alliance didn't delay the mining operations and sent their engineers to get things started. The central government and the Aldebaran Alliance were quite happy with this development. After all, this was a rather handsome reward for their efforts. Renz also played an important role in pacifying his brother and told him that this agreement would benefit the Dvalan Federation in the long run. The strategist had secretly met with Zion after the meeting and had pledged his loyalty to his cause. 13, on the other hand, didn't bat an eye and gave Renz some confidential orders, which could only be done by him. This included a blueprint of a special missile that would be used in their next operation. Make sure to tell your brother that I secretly stole this blueprint from the Levinas archives as my way of repaying his kindness for accepting my grandfather's proposal. Those were the words that 13 had asked Renz to pass to Wendell. Just as he expected, the moment the monarch of the Dvalan Federation saw the blueprint, his earlier annoyance disappeared completely. The blueprint 13 had sent him was the blueprint of the Mephisto missile, which he only planned to share with the Dvalan Federation, the Aldebaran Alliance, and the central government. He wanted to create an exclusive group that benefited from each other. This setup would not only allow 13 to gain favors from them, but would also strengthen the Alliance's ability to confront the high-ranking monsters that would appear in 3 years' time. Since they had already seen the Mephisto missile in action, they would definitely produce as many of them as they could, which would save many lives in the future. 13 had modified the blueprint to make its destructive power as close to the Mephisto missiles, which had been empowered by his rune magic. Of course, he also shared this information with his grandfather, which made the latter shake his head helplessly. We could have monopolized this technology and left everyone in the dust, Arthur said. But you did the right thing. You even made sure that the Mephisto missile can only be empowered by Imperiums. This is a safeguard to make sure that only the Alliance can make them, isn't it? Yes, 13 replied. Even if Signy and Sirius got wind of this, we will still have the advantage. The other factions will certainly use this opportunity to boost their own arsenal. I don't think they'd share their missile stockpile with the Ashford and Stallard clan. Then, how about you give me the blueprint of Nautilus? Arthur insisted. That way, our family will be ahead of everyone. 13 shook his head firmly. We've already talked about this, Gramps. No can do. Even one more Nautilus will break the balance of the world. Arthur clicked his tongue, but he didn't insist, knowing that when his grandson decided on something, he would not be easily convinced to change his mind. After their talk, the teenage boy finally returned to his quarters to rest. Meanwhile, somewhere in the Rigel continent, Jalrog, who had both eaten the Broodmother and the Wolf King, burrowed deep underground. Because of this, he decided to hibernate for 2 to 3 months, allowing him to properly digest Nizana's and Aram's cores. It believed that if given enough time, it would finally be able to break through to its next rank, advancing into a rank 9 sovereign who'd be strong enough to challenge the Earth Dragons. His goal was simple: break through to become a Majin prince before their master crossed over to Pangea, allowing him to get his revenge. I'm sure that the arrogant Vanaroth and that aloof Erasmus think that I'm already dead, Jalrog mused. It's better if they think that way. I can take my time and break through to the next rank. The Centipede King then laid on the ground perfectly still and closed its eyes to rest. Things unfolded just like that messenger told me, but I don't trust him, Jalrog thought. I'll just use him until I reach my goal. After that, does he really think that he can order me around? The Centipede King sneered as it thought of the humanoid who had met with it in the past. Jalrog believed that since both of them were using each other, it would not be breaking its word if it also decided to betray the messenger once he gained enough strength to do so. A few minutes later, the Centipede King's exoskeleton expanded and covered its body in a cocoon, allowing it to transform into its next form. But as Jalrog entered its hibernation state, something was happening inside its stomach. From the flesh of the Wolf King, countless purple larvae the size of a human hand emerged and started to multiply rapidly. This was one of the abilities that 13 had acquired when he was filling up his immortal parade of 100 demons. Venomous parasites. When Tiona's army exploded into blood mist, it coated the Wolf King's army with this poison. They also used this ability when the Centipede King and the Wolf King fought against each other, stacking up the effects of the poison on the Wolf King's body. However, it didn't end there. Not only was the Wolf King's body coated with Tiona's venom, slowly affecting the Centipede King over time, but the venomous parasites also secreted the same venom that the Domini Mortis had, strengthening the spreading poison in Jalrog's body. Although the Centipede King was immune to almost all poisons in the world, there was one poison that could bypass this immunity, and that was none other than the venom of the Domini Mortis. From the very start, 13 knew that Jalrog wasn't someone he could trust. Also, since the Centipede King had betrayed its comrades once, it would not hesitate to betray others in the future. 13 would make sure that the Centipede King would not pose a threat to him in the future. Even if Jalrog successfully managed to become a rank 9 sovereign, it would be greatly weakened and under the teenage boy's control. Just like the Centipede King thought, both of them were just using each other. However, it didn't know that it was the one who got the short end of the stick. For now, it dreamed of a happy dream where it became a Majin prince and gained the power that it had been longing for its entire life. 2 weeks after the liberation of the northern regions of the Rigel continent. "Are you sure about this, Wendell?" the monarch of the Ashford clan, Aaron Ashford, asked. "We can still go back to being good friends if you agree to my proposal." "I'm tired of your bullshit, Aaron," Wendell replied. "You and Norman could go to hell for all I care." "Watch your words, my friend." The monarch of the Stallard clan, Norman Stallard, sighed. "Can't we just all get along like we used to? It will be beneficial for us all if we all work together." "No, I just woke up to reality." Wendell sneered. "Having 2 hyenas as friends will make me look like one." "Huh, look at you now." Aaron sneered back. "Just where is that confidence of yours coming from?" "Lawrence Seaton," Wendell replied with a smile. "He also told me to tell you that if he finds out that you used your dirty hands to hurt our interest, he will come to pay you a visit and break your other arm." "You really think that Lawrence can?" Aaron wasn't able to finish whatever he was going to say because Wendell cut him off immediately. "Don't think I've forgotten how you begged him for forgiveness and pledged that you will work with him to save humanity after he beat the crap out of you." Wendell smirked. "You should have seen your face back then. What makes you think that you're hot stuff when all you can do is stab someone in the back, huh? And you too, Norman. I suggest that you find other friends. I've tolerated both of you these past few years. I can't count how many times I asked for your assistance, but every time, you ignore my requests. Yet now that you've heard of the resources being mined in my territory, you also want to have a share? Can you stop being delusional? I'll say this once. Get your filthy hands off my continent, or I'll convince Lawrence that we don't need a backstabbing monarch in this world." Wendell gave the 2 people the middle finger before cutting off the connection. A moment later, the table in front of Aaron shattered as he smashed it with his fists. "Bastard! Now he dares to act tough after getting chummy with the central government." Aaron seethed in anger. "Back then, he wouldn't even dare to raise his voice against us." Norman sighed a second time. "Well, it can't be helped. Since we didn't send our forces to help them, it's understandable that he doesn't want us to gain any benefits from their hard work. The only regret I have is that they didn't suffer any major casualties in that battle. It seems that Brat from the Leventis family lives up to his reputation as the legendary rookie. Maybe we should tone down a bit and try to mend ties with them. What do you say?" Aaron snorted before he, too, cut off his connection, ending the online meeting. "What a mess," Norman muttered before picking up the files of Zion Leventis in front of him. It contained the known information about the most popular rookie in the world right now. Accidentally entered a dimensional gate when he was 7 and stayed in Solterra for 3 years. Norman leaned back on a chair as he read the information that his people had gathered. Rumored to have fought against a Majin prince in the front lines and won. After that, he appeared in the places where his brother and sister were taking their first wandering and helped them complete their missions. After returning to Pangea, he decided to join the central government and used a public appraisal equipment, revealing his status page to the world. Permanent debuffs are rank ban, skill ban, avatar ban, and item ban. Unique ability is universal language proficiency. He also has a beast companion, a Domini Mortis which he named Tiona. Norman looked at the known information about Zion Leventis. Based on the spy that he had planted on his 69th Battalion, all of these were true. It had been 3 years since Zion had returned to Pangea, and his rank was still a rookie. He was never seen using any items or abilities which most wanderers could use. Also, he didn't have a single avatar in his possession. Even so, Norman had to admit that the person whom many called the weakest wanderer in the world behind his back had surpassed the achievements of monarchs like him. But Norman felt that something was wrong. There was no way someone like Zion could achieve what he had achieved if he didn't have some kind of secret. I'll uncover your secret when we meet in the Signy continent. Norman smiled faintly. Until then, I'll look forward to seeing what else you can do, Zion Leventis. Dvalin Tower in the Rigel continent. It is as you have expected, Zion Wendell said. The hands of those two bastards are getting itchy. As soon as their meeting ended, Wendell immediately called their supreme commander to inform him about what Aaron and Norman tried to propose to him. The teenage boy only listened and waited until Wendell was done talking. When the monarch finally stopped, someone spoke inside the room, making Wendell and 13 look in his direction. Seriously, are the two of you treating me like air? Douglas Griffin, the monarch of the Signy continent, complained. You casually talk about these things in front of me. Are you not afraid that I will tell this to Aaron and Norman? No, Wendell replied in a heartbeat. Even if you tell them, what can they do about it? 13 answered calmly. Also, the main reason why Lord Wendell didn't hold back in telling us this information is because he wants you to become an accomplice. Damn right you are, Zion. Wendell smirked before shifting his gaze to the monarch who had flown for nearly a day from the Signy continent to talk to them in person. Now, Douglas, why are you here again? I'm here to talk business and cooperation, Douglas, who didn't like to drag things out, answered. Right now, I need resources. However, since I know that the Dvalin Federation will not give us anything, because you need the raw materials to create machinery and ammunition, I can only negotiate with the Leventis family. With Arthur? Wendell arched an eyebrow. You don't plan to talk to Trevor and Lawrence? Douglas shook his head. The central government will use all the resources they gain to boost their own armies. As for the Aldebaran continent, 4 people need to share that 25% split that you have agreed upon. I doubt that they will agree to sell their resources to me, which means this only leaves the Leventis family. Since they don't need much, I plan to ask Arthur to sell us 15% of his shares. Okay, 13, who was sipping his tea on the side, replied casually. I'll convince my grandfather to sell you the 15% shares of our resources. I'll also convince him to let you buy it at a discounted price. Wendell and Douglas exchanged a glance at each other before the monarch of the Signy continent chuckled. I was expecting that I will need to negotiate at a disadvantageous position when I get here, Douglas commented. I didn't expect that it would be this easy. I even got a discount, but I know that there is no free lunch in this world. The monarch narrowed his eyes at the teenage boy, who was sitting in front of him and still wearing his pajamas. If other people were to do this to him, he would have already slapped them into meat paste and gotten over it. But he didn't dare to do that to the boy whom he planned to ask for help when it was time for his continent to face the Jinn invasion, which had been his greatest fear as of late. So, what do you want from me? Douglas asked. An arm and a leg, 13 replied. Can you give that to me? Are you talking about my arm and leg? Douglas arched an eyebrow. Of course not, 13 replied. I want the arm and leg of the Black Dragon of Destruction, the one you guys killed 300 years ago. Give that to me, and I'll even throw in the blueprint of Mephisto as a freebie. When Douglas and Wendell heard 13's words, their gazes became solemn. When the Black Dragon of Destruction was defeated, the 5 monarchs split its body evenly. Aaron Ashford took the dragon wings for himself. Trevor Remington got its head and tail. Douglas Griffin and Wendell Elrod each got an arm and leg, while Norman Stallard received its body. As for Lawrence, he got its core. The Black Dragon was a rank 9 sovereign, but it wasn't an ordinary rank 9 sovereign. No, it was a pseudo-prince, and the Monarch clans had done everything in their power to research many ways how to properly use the dragon parts in their possession. Their blacksmiths had managed to create peak gold-grade equipment with the monster parts that they received. However, Since the Black Dragon was over 100 meters tall, the materials they had left were still aplenty, allowing the monarch clans to completely arm their elite forces with gold-grade equipment. "You can't have both," Douglas said after careful consideration. "Choose one, an arm or a leg. I will only give one to you." 13 chuckled internally. This was part of his plan. He deliberately said that he wanted 2 dragon parts, knowing that Douglas would try to bargain and reduce its number to 1. "Fine," 13 replied. "Give me the arm or what remains of it. I'm sure you already use the scales and maybe 2 or 3 claws from it. So I'll be nice and just take what's left." Douglas breathed in relief internally because they had indeed almost used the entire arm for their equipment. Only the leg part was untouched. So he was more than happy to give the teenage boy what was left of the arm of destruction, which belonged to the dragon that 13's former host sacrificed his life to kill. For 13, getting a piece of that dragon held a sentimental value worth more than its true value. Right now, no one in Pangea could craft armor above the gold grade. This was why the monarchs, who possessed 1 mythical armament each, were considered as the strongest fighting force of humanity. However, only Lawrence was aware that aside from them, there was one more person who wielded not only 1, but 3 mythical armaments, and that was none other than Arthur Levinus. 847. If he were to know that Lady Callista was also in possession of 2 mythical short swords, the Grand Marshal of the Central Government would definitely become more chummy with Arthur and might even call him his future-in-law. After reaching an agreement, 13 asked for his grandfather to go to the Dvalin Tower to finalize the deal for the split in resources. To Wendell's and Douglas' surprise, the most stubborn throne in Pangea didn't bat an eye and readily agreed to the condition after hearing it for the first time. Arthur wasn't worried about selling the 15% of the Levinus family resources at a discounted price. 13 had already talked to him beforehand that there was a high chance that Douglas would try to negotiate with them to gain more resources. Arthur wanted to object at first, but when the teenage boy told him that he would exchange it for the body part of the Black Dragon of Destruction to create a mythical weapon, the patriarch of the Levinus family immediately changed his mind. Since he knew that his no-good grandson could gather resources without alerting the Alliance, they would still get more than what they currently needed. "I'll have the arm personally delivered to you after a week," Douglas promised. "Are you fine with that?" "Okay." Arthur nodded. After shaking hands with each other, 13 left with his grandpa and left the 2 monarchs to discuss other means of cooperation between them. "How many can he make with the arm?" Arthur asked. "It's too early to tell," 13 replied. "It really depends on what is left of the arm. Bones is fine, scales is good too, but we need the claws the most." Arthur no longer said anything because this was not the place to talk about such an important matter. "I know you don't want to give me Nautilus, but can you give me something else?" Arthur asked. "You already share Mephisto with Douglas and the Alliance. We need to create more advanced weapons to be competitive." 13 smiled faintly before nodding his head. "Very well. Let's talk in my room." Seeing that his grandson didn't reject his proposal, Arthur's mood became better. Once they were away from the prying eyes and ears of the people around them, the 2 started to negotiate with each other. "So you want something that is a scaled-down version of Nautilus?" 13 inquired. "Yes," Arthur replied. "Something with advanced stealth capabilities that cannot be detected by radar." "How many do you plan to build?" 13 asked. "As many as possible," Arthur answered. "You're going to go bankrupt, Gramps." "How can I possibly go bankrupt with you around? Just give me what I need." 13 shook his head before taking out something from his dimensional storage. Arthur had been pestering him for the past few days about Nautilus, so he decided to make a downsized version of one of his trump cards. "Here you go, Gramps," 13 replied. "Have fun with Project Nemo." "This is—" Arthur's eyes widened in shock after seeing the submarine that 13 had named Nemo. "Gramps, make sure to let different engineers work on a different part like what I did with Nautilus," 13 said solemnly. "Although this submarine only has a quarter of Nautilus firepower, it is still quite powerful, especially if you plan to create more than one of them." Arthur almost choked when the teenage boy said that Nemo only had a quarter of Nautilus firepower. The blueprint in his hands was already extremely powerful, which he believed could potentially take out a rank 8 sovereign on its own. If Nautilus really was 4 times more powerful than Nemo, then what kind of existence could the former destroy once it was properly calibrated to perfection? Zion, you said that this voyage of the Nautilus here in the Rigel continent is just a test run, so you can do some modifications to it, right? Arthur asked. Right. 13 nodded. Then, what is Nautilus doing right now? Arthur inquired. Since the war started, he hadn't seen any support fire coming from Nautilus, which puzzled him greatly. Ah, that. 13 smirked. Let's just say that it is busy keeping 3 Earth dragons busy. Arthur hissed as he sucked in a cold breath because things were finally falling into place. Ever since they had captured the North, the Alliance had been worried that the Earth dragons might make a move to attack them. However, they hadn't seen any signs of that happening and wondered if they were just regrouping for a massive counterattack. You mean to say that Nautilus is dealing with the Earth dragons? Arthur asked in disbelief. On its own, 13 smiled mischievously before placing his finger over his lips. Don't tell anyone, okay? Arthur looked at his no-good grandson before shifting his gaze on the blueprint in his hands. This boy really is born from my genes, Arthur thought. He is as smart as me when I was his age. At that moment, Arthur finally made a decision. He would make sure to reinstate Gerald as a member of the Levinas family because he didn't want Zion to go anywhere. Little did he know that Gerald's family had no interest in returning to the Levinas family. After all, by the time 13 was finished with his plans, he was certain that the main branch of the Levinas family would be none other than them. In fact, he was already waiting with anticipation on how Arthur would react when he realized that his family had become the branch family right under his nose. After the deal between Arthur and Douglas had been finalized, the patriarch of the Leventis clan took a temporary leave from the Alliance and accompanied Douglas back to the Cygni continent. The two traveled incognito, intending to keep the exchange they would be doing from the Ashford and Staller clan, thus avoiding a mess. 8 days later, Arthur was back on the Aldebaran continent and personally delivered the arm of the Black Dragon to Gerald. Since it had been a while since he had last seen his wives, including Lady Callista, Arthur decided to stay in his residence for 2 to 3 days and spend some time with his women. While this was happening, Gerald and 13 were having a serious discussion about how to handle the arm of the Black Dragon of Destruction. Pops, you will not be able to melt the dragon bones, claws, and scales with normal flames, 13 stated. If you want to forge this, you will need the help of the Order of Raziel. I already talked to them a week ago, and they should have already made adequate preparations to receive you. It doesn't matter if you could only make gold-grade armaments with it. As long as you don't waste the ingredients, that's already considered a success. Gerald crossed his arms over his chest as he looked at the projection of his son, who was arrogantly sitting on a throne while drinking a glass of fruit juice. Son, just who do you think I am? Gerald asked smugly. With this kind of materials, wouldn't it be a shame if I don't create a mythical rank equipment? 13 smirked. Pops, the chances of you successfully crafting a mythical equipment is only 1%, while the chances of you failing to craft even a peak gold-grade equipment is 60%. Do you really want to take a gamble? What a stupid question. Gerald sneered. Why would I settle for gold-grade equipment? Even if I fail, I will only aim to craft mythical armaments and above. The no-good son and the no-good father pair stared at each other for a full minute before smiling at the same time. Pops, if you waste the Black Dragon arm, I will kill you. Ha ha, I dare you to kill me. The two laughed evilly. Rhea, who was cluelessly listening to the conversation between her father and brother, laughed alongside them, while Alessia and Remy only shook their heads helplessly. Pops, just settle for gold grade, okay? You still have skill issues. How dare you talk to your old man like that? Skill issue? Your mother and I had been at it for 60 rounds when she conceived you, arg. Alessia smacked Gerald's head with her fist before dragging him away to a corner. Remy and Rhea blinked their eyes because they had no idea what their father was talking about. While Alessia was busy grinding her husband's head with her hands, Rhea and Remy talked to Zion and told him how they were doing. The talk between the siblings was harmonious. It was as if Gerald's earlier comment was never spoken. When the henpecked husband finally returned, The smugness he had earlier had disappeared without a trace. Seeing his father's defeated look, 13 sighed before nodding his head. "Fine," 13 replied. "Aim for the mythical rank and above. That dragon's arm is just a bonus anyway." Hearing his son's words, Gerald regained his confidence and laughed loudly. "That's the spirit," Gerald stated. "Either we go all in or nothing. The more desperate I am, the more powerful my creation will be." "Sure." 13 shook his head helplessly. "Just make sure to wear a disguise. Now is not the time to antagonize Death Wish. Your priority is to craft anything from that dragon arm and send it to Nautilus. I will handle the rest." 3 hours later, Gerald had already packed up everything he needed before bidding his family goodbye. He then entered the portal inside their family home and was teleported to Lancaster City, which was Gerald's base in Solterra. As soon as he arrived, he went to the tavern called the Drunk Tavern, where the representative of the Order of Raziel was waiting for him. When Gerald arrived at the tavern, he noticed someone drinking at the corner, wearing a black robe with the insignia of the Shadow Union. This was one of the branches of the Order of Raziel, whose help 13 asked for back in the battle in Arcadia Archipelago. "The Union finds its strength and unity," the robed individual answered. "Your pops, I presume?" The corner of Gerald's lips twitched after hearing the robed individual's question. However, he knew that he should answer seriously or risk losing his contact. Gerald didn't hesitate to sit beside the robed individual and ordered a mug of mead. "In the depths of the shadows where light dares not tread," Gerald said in a tone that only the robed individual could hear. "The Union finds its strength and unity," the robed individual answered. "Your pops, I presume?" The corner of Gerald's lips twitched after hearing the robed individual's question. However, he knew that he should answer seriously or risk losing his contact. "Yes, that's me," Gerald replied. "Did my no-good son ask you to call me that?" The robed individual suddenly giggled after hearing Gerald's reply. 13's father couldn't help but arch an eyebrow when he met the robed individual's gaze. Red eyes that glowed faintly within the darkness met Gerald's own green eyes. The moment he saw those eyes, a grin appeared on Gerald's eyes. "So it's you, Adira," Gerald chuckled. "Why the need to act mysterious when we already know each other?" "That's because this is business, Pops," Adira replied in a teasing tone. "Finish your drink so we can go. We'll be traveling for a few hours before we reach our destination." Gerald nodded and emptied the mug that was just given to him by the barkeep. After paying for his drink, the two left and entered the teleportation gate. After an hour of constantly jumping from portal to portal, they appeared in a city that was under the control of the Shadow Union. When Adira entered their secret headquarters, a teenage boy with black hair and green eyes looked at them with a smile. "What took you guys so long?" 13 asked. "Shut up, brat," Adira replied before giving 13 a tight hug. "You haven't shown yourself for 3 years, and you come to us asking for favors as soon as you make your appearance. You sure treat us like your servants, huh?" 13 averted his gaze as he decided to endure being hugged by the drow, whom he had seen a week ago. Gerald looked at his son and gave him a thumbs up in his heart. Even though Adira was a drow, she was a very beautiful one, especially when it came to drow standards. "I can't stay for long, so let's go to the main headquarters first," 13 proposed. Adira clicked her tongue before reluctantly letting go of the boy. "Let's go to the courtyard." The drow dragged 13, and Gerald followed with a faint smile on his face. This was the first time he saw his son being dragged around like this, and it lifted his mood. When they arrived at the courtyard, Rocky's head poked out of the ground and swallowed Gerald and Adira. 13 then clapped his hands together and used his artifact that allowed him to teleport to a place once a day. He brought his father to the main headquarters of the Shadow Union, intending to borrow their forge, which housed the flames of Sylvana, one of the few unique flames in the world that could melt even the bones of a rank 9 black dragon. After sending his father to the main headquarters of the Shadow Union, 13 returned to Pangea through the Order of the Apocalypse. The teenage boy could return to Solterra at any given time if he first teleported to the Order of the Apocalypse and asked Metatron to open a gateway to the place where he intended to go to. However, he could only use this special service once a week, and there was also a limitation. He could only be teleported to villages, towns, or cities that were not under the influence or control of the Wanderers, like the human kingdoms ruled by the 5 monarchs and 10 prestigious families. Since he was short on time, he decided to use this method to send his father to the main headquarters of the Shadow Union. After the battle in the Arcadia archipelago, his relationship with the Order of Rizel improved, good enough that he could ask favors from them. Also, since he will not return to Solterra for an indefinite period of time, he made sure to leave letters addressed to Taiga and his brother, Anwar. The 2 Tigerkins were busy increasing their influence and strength while he was away. What 13 didn't know was that Taiga was currently traveling with Mikhail and Shasha, helping them with their quests. Their meeting was purely coincidental. Taiga happened to be training in the region where the brother and sister had been sent for their mission. Because he had no idea that his hero servant was currently on Cloud 9 because he was helping Shasha with her mission, 13 returned to Pangea after asking Adira to send his letters for him. But as soon as 13 returned to Pangea, his communicator received a message telling him to watch the news. Zion, watch Channel 9. Those 2 bastards are up to their dirty tricks again. The sender of the message was none other than Wendell. So 13 decided to open the television to see what the monarch was talking about. Immediately, the faces of Aaron Ashford and Norman Stallard appeared on the screen. A joint press conference? 13 arched an eyebrow before sitting on the couch to see what the 2 hyenas were up to. Humanity has managed to take the first step to push back the Majins and Majins from the Rigel continent, Aaron stated. As such, the Ashford clan and Stallard clan also decided to join their war efforts to finally put an end to the tyranny of the monsters that have stolen our lands, honor, dignity, and even future. 13 chuckled because he already understood what the sleazy bastard wanted to do. So, you want to use the media to manipulate the will of the people. 13 smirked. Not bad. The teenage boy already knew where this was going, but he still decided to watch the farce that the 2 monarchs were trying to pull. We have been too busy fortifying our forces in the Signy continent, so we were unable to send our army to the Rigel continent, Norman stated. But now, since everyone must join hands to remove the threat to the world, we decided to send our personal armies to reinforce the Dvalin Federation from their plight. I believe that together, we will be able to do great things and finally put an end to the Jinn tyranny. We do this not for our own benefits, but to give humankind the peace and safety that they had longed for centuries. 13 praised Norman's eloquence in his mind. Among the monarchs in Pangea, Norman Stallard had always been the best at speaking, so he was usually the one who made the important announcements from the monarch clans. Since we will be joining the allied armies, we will also let the current Supreme Commander, Zion Leventus, command our armies to battle, Norman added. With the strategies and our might, we will prevail. Norman raised his closed fist, making his subordinates cheer and clap their hands. Our naval forces are traveling to the Rigel continent as we speak, Aaron declared. We ask for everyone's support in our endeavors. Long live Pangea! Long live Pangea! Long live Pangea! Long live Pangea! The reporters, who belonged to the Sirius continent and were bribed to stir the narration of the press conference to their desired result, also clapped their hands. A faint smile appeared on 13's lips when he saw Wendell trying to contact him at this time. He accepted the call, and the projection of Wendell, Lawrence, Trevor, and Arthur appeared in front of him. Those 2 bastards are trying to strong-arm their way in, Wendell stated. What do we do? If we reject them, they will definitely make us appear bad in the eyes of the public, Trevor stated. Also, even though he said that his ships were only on their way here to Rigel continent, they're only a few hours away from the Dvalin Federation. It seems that they left several days earlier before this press conference was made. They really thought things through. Lawrence and Arthur didn't comment. They only looked at the teenage boy, whose smile had widened a bit after hearing Trevor's words. On the contrary, Wendell, who had already burned bridges with the Ashford clan and the Stallard clan, was visibly worried, not knowing how he would handle the incoming uninvited guests into his territory. Gentlemen, Why are you worrying about something like this? 13 asked. Since they have sent us meat shields to be used as padding to the front lines, then let us accept them. But Zion, those bastards will definitely make a mess of things. Wendell stated. I'm sure they will also try to get some share for the resources. 13 chuckled after hearing Wendell's statement. Resources? The only resources anyone would get in the Rigel continent were the resources he would allow them to get. Even now, if 13 wished for it, he could suck the Imperium mines dry in just a few days with Rocky's help. He wasn't worried about the Ashford clans and the Stallard clan's attempt to try to dig their own mines. Even if they ever found any useful resources, 13 would steal them right under their noses. Let them come, 13 replied. Also, make sure that we can have a press conference at any given time. They are here because they're trying to sway the will of the people. But we can play that game, can't we? Are you sure about this? Trevor inquired. Although Aaron and Norman will not personally come here, they will be sending their second-in-commands to take control of their forces. It doesn't matter. 13 shrugged. Let them come. As I said earlier, we will need meat shields. Since they volunteered, then we will send them to the front lines. They will have to work hard if they want to have share of my ARR pie. Arthur and Lawrence couldn't help but smirk because both of them were thinking of the same thing. This brat is probably thinking of something evil right now. That was what the two men were thinking, and they were right. 13 was already laughing in his heart because he already knew what to do with the sacrificial pawns that had forced themselves to his home turf. Tiona, who was coiled around 13's neck, shook her head because she knew that whoever tried to oppose her master was simply courting death. 2 days after Aaron Ashford and Norman Stallard held their press conference, their naval fleets finally arrived at the main headquarters of the Dvalin Federation. They even brought their own news crew with them, perhaps to ensure that the people would see them in a good light. The moment the floating island of the Dvalin Federation came to view, they even started a live broadcast. The paid reporter immediately used her expertise to cast a positive narrative, telling the viewers about how the forces from the two monarch clans rushed to their destination out of determination to help humanity repel the invaders. Even 13 was impressed by her acting and reporting skills. Impressed enough that he took note of her name so that he could brainwash invite her to work for him instead. When Seth Ashford and Alan Norman, along with some of their soldiers, stepped foot into the man-made floating fortress of the Dvalin Federation, they were given a proper welcome by the members of the Alliance. Since the reporters who had broadcasted 13's first expedition were still with them, they were invited to participate in this momentous event to cover the arrival of their reinforcements. Welcome to the Dvalin Federation. Benedict greeted Seth and Alan, who were the third-in-commands of the Ashford and Stallard clans. It's nice to see you again, Benedict, Seth said as he shook hands with the old man. But where are the rest? Are you the only one who has come to greet us? Yes, Benedict replied. Everyone is busy discussing the strategy for the next mission. Seth sneered, knowing that since they had come unannounced, none of the big shots of the Alliance wished to meet them. But since they were already there, he believed that they would have no choice but to work with them. As the entourage of the Ashford and Stallard clan walked toward the base, they saw over 100 soldiers marching in their direction, with Zion at the front. Benedict and the members of the Alliance saluted their supreme commander, while Seth and Alan merely nodded their heads in greeting. Uncle Benedict, who are these people? 13 asked with a smile. Benedict, who had been called uncle in front of everyone, returned Zion's smile with a smile of his own. These are our reinforcement from the Ashford and Stallard clans, Benedict replied. Let me introduce to you these two gentlemen. No need for you to introduce us, Benedict, Seth interjected. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Seth Ashford. I am the third-in-command of the Ashford clan. Alan Stallard, Alan stated. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too, Seth and Alan, 13 replied, treating the two adults as if they were of the same age as him. I heard that you plan to join the Alliance. Is this true? Seth gave the cameraman who was following 13 a sidelong glance and saw that the words BBC News were imbued on his uniform. They were the biggest TV station in Pangea, and they broadcasted to the entire world. They were not under the control of the Ashford and Stallard clans because they belonged to the central government. Of course, We came here for the sake of humanity, Seth replied. We will put our lives in your care. Zion Leventis. Alan nodded in agreement with his comrade's words. Let me remind you that as the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, I expect that all of you will follow my orders without question, 13 said in a solemn tone. Will you do that? Sure, Seth chuckled. We will follow your orders, Commander. Really? 13 arched an eyebrow. Then let's put you and your men to the test. 13 then crossed his arms over his chest and raised his chin arrogantly. Kneel, 13 ordered. At first, Seth thought that he had just misheard the boy's words, but after seeing that the other party wasn't smiling, he realized that it wasn't a joke. Zion, what kind of order is this? Seth tried to pass it out like a joke. You should be more respectful to your elders, you know? What's wrong? 13 arched an eyebrow. Was my order not clear enough? Then let me repeat it. Kneel. The staff from the BBC News, who could smell a scoop from a mile away, focused their lenses on the scene, which was being broadcasted live. Boy, are you messing with me? Seth, who was doing his best to keep the smile on his face, asked. I'm ordering you as the Supreme Commander to kneel, and you can't even follow a simple order? 13 chuckled. Did you come here to play? If so, all of you can go back to where you came from. I don't need soldiers who can't follow my orders. Alan, who was listening to the side, frowned. This wasn't the welcome they were expecting from the people in the Dvalin Federation. Benedict still had a calm expression on his face, but he was also surprised about the sudden shift in atmosphere. Listen here, you brat. Seth pointed at 13 and unleashed a bit of his aura, intending to overwhelm the boy. However, before he could do what he planned to do, the aura of two monarchs slammed down on Seth's body, making the latter's face turn pale. Seth Ashford, I think you're forgetting where you are, 13 said firmly. I'm the Supreme Commander of the Alliance. My orders are absolute. I am merely ordering you and your men to kneel, and you can't even do it. It's such a simple order, yet you already failed to comprehend it. When I order the members of the Alliance to go to the battlefield, I don't order them to kneel. 13 took a step forward and stared at the champion who was being suppressed by Lawrence's and Wendell's auras. When my soldiers go to the battlefield, I order them to die, 13 said icily. Even so, they follow my orders without question. You and your people come here without permission and say that you are here to fight for humanity. But from what I can see, none of you came here with that intention. Also, when you're here, you will not call me Zion, child, boy, or brat. You will call me sir. If you can't even do that, then get out. If all it takes to reclaim the Dvalin Federation is a kneel, everyone from the Dvalin Federation would have done so gladly. Aren't you being too full of yourself? Alan, who could no longer take it, asked. If you command us on the battlefield, then we will listen. But you commanding us to kneel here is just to humiliate us. Humiliate? 13 smirked before turning to look at Benedict, who was standing beside the two champions. Benedict Riggs, kneel. 13 ordered. Yes, sir. Benedict didn't hesitate and knelt down in front of 13, making Seth and Alan look at him in shock. They knew how proud Benedict was. He would even fight Arthur without fear, despite the difference in their ranks. However, seeing him kneel in obedience to the boy's order made them feel as if they were looking at a different person. Benedict Riggs is not kneeling to me because I want to humiliate him, 13 stated. He is kneeling because he has absolute faith that I am not ordering him for no reason at all. Like I told you earlier, I don't order my soldiers to kneel, I order them to die. 13 then patted Benedict's shoulder. Rise, 13 ordered. Benedict rose up and stood in attention like the soldier he was, waiting for orders. 13 then shifted his attention back to Seth and Alan, who were now the focus of attention of not only the media, but also the soldiers of the Dvalin Federation, who were all glaring at them. It was only now that they realized that if they did anything to the boy, they would not be able to leave the Dvalin Federation alive. 13 simply stared at the two, but his gaze contained so much pressure that the two champions felt that they only had two choices. One was to kneel, the other was to leave. Leaving was not an option. If they did that, they had a feeling that they would no longer be welcome in the Dvalin Federation. Although unwilling, Seth was the first one to move and knelt in front of the Supreme Commander of the Alliance. After seeing that their commander had knelt to the teenage boy, the soldiers who were accompanying Seth begrudgingly knelt as well. This forced Elyon and his own soldiers to follow suit. 13 didn't order them to rise and simply looked down on them arrogantly, his arms crossed over his chest. "Remember this, men. There won't be a next time," 13 warned. "All of you rise." After hearing the boy's orders, Seth, Elyon, and their soldiers hurriedly rose to their feet and glared at him. 13 chuckled internally and spread his arms wide. "Welcome to the Dvalin Federation." 13 smiled evilly. "A place where only those who are seriously fighting for humanity belong." 13 then turned around to return where he came from. Seth and Elyon looked at the boy's retreating figure as they did their best to keep their calm. They thought that once they arrived at the Dvalin Federation, everything would go their way. But after seeing the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, they had a feeling that things would not be as easy as they initially thought they would. After escorting their guests to their temporary accommodations, Benedict headed to the commander's quarters, where 13 was staying. "You little bastard. You really made me kneel, huh?" Benedict growled. "I just went along with the flow, so you won't be embarrassed, but you went too far." What is this?" 13 had handed a data chip to Benedict, which made the old man frown. "That has the location of a small-sized Imperium mine the Levinas family has discovered," 13 said. "Since I embarrassed Uncle earlier, that small mine is yours. I'm sure the Alliance won't mind." "Ahaziah, my boy. Your uncle is not really offended by what happened earlier," Benedict replied as he hastily pocketed the data chip. "It's just a small matter. In the future, don't hesitate to ask me for help. I'll gladly help you." "I know, Uncle. You're the best." 13 smirked, knowing that Benedict was just as greedy as his grandfather when it came to resources and treasures. "Still, are you sure that it is wise to offend them like that?" Benedict asked before looking at what Zion was doing. "Of course," 13 replied. "All of them must become aware that they are no longer in their backyard. They are in MYR, our backyard." Little did Benedict know that right after the confrontation earlier ended, 13's black propaganda to tarnish the reputation of the Ashford clan and Stallard clan had already begun. Since the two clans were using information warfare to fool the general public into thinking that they were the good guys, 13 planned to use the same weapon to make them look like the bad guys. Unfortunately, no matter how great their connection to the media was, they were still too green compared to the system of cannon fodders, who had made kings, emperors, and politicians fall from grace with his black propaganda. As soon as Benedict left to share the happy news to his family about acquiring a small-sized Imperium mine, 13 began to hack the various TV stations in the world and set his plans into motion. While this was happening, Seth, who had been humiliated by the boy, was doing his best to stop himself from breaking things out of anger from what he had suffered earlier. At that moment, his communicator began to ring. When he saw that the caller was his patriarch, he immediately reined in his anger and answered the call. "Sir, we have a problem," Seth said. "Yes, we really have a problem," Aaron icily replied. "Check the news now." Seth subconsciously shuddered after hearing the monarch's command and immediately opened the TV to check the news. Breaking news. Seth Ashford and Norman Stallard started conflicts as soon as they arrived in the Dvalin Federation. The breaking news immediately made Seth's face pale because he had ordered the reporters on their side to use the recording to paint Zion in a bad light. However, before the reporters could even do that, 13 had beaten them to it and published the recordings that had been deliberately edited to turn the tables on them. In the recording, Seth's defiance of Zion's orders was highlighted, and the caption below the screen was saying that he was being arrogant and refused to obey the Supreme Commander of the Alliance. Of course, it was not only Seth being splashed with dirty water. Even Elyon, who only said a few words, was painted as the bad guy, making the latter fume after he was also informed of what was happening on TV. Our reporter at the scene, Rain, has managed to book an exclusive interview with Zion Leventis to get his reaction on the disrespect he had received from the commanders of the Ashford and Stallard clan, the news anchor said. "Thank you." Rain nodded slightly. "This is Rain, reporting for BBC." The camera panned to her and 13, who was wearing his Supreme Commander uniform. 13 had a very pained expression on his face, as if he was greatly affected by what happened earlier. "Sir, what did you feel when Seth Ashford and Alan Stallard refused to obey your orders and disrespected you in front of everyone?" Rain asked, her beautiful face slightly scrunched to match 13's mood. "It was a very mortifying experience," 13 replied. "They said that they came to help the Alliance fight against the Majins, so I decided to test whether they were serious or not. On the battlefield, every order I make will decide the life and death of countless soldiers. I am forced to make hard decisions, which would force our soldiers to risk their lives in battle. Fortunately, during the past expedition, everyone obeyed my orders without fail. Thanks to their faith in me, we succeeded in liberating the northern regions of the continent. When the Ashford and the Stallard clan arrived, I thought their help would increase our chances of winning. I believed that all of us were going to fight under one banner. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. My simple test to see if they are willing to obey my orders and put their lives in my hands resulted in the video that you just saw earlier. Not only did they disregard my orders, but they also challenged my authority. I think it will be better for humanity if they just return to where they came from. Soldiers like them who can't follow orders are not needed on the battlefield. They will only endanger the Alliance because of their inability to work together as a team." Arthur, Michael, and Hans looked at the TV with amused expressions on their faces. If they hadn't known how black-bellied Zion truly was, they might have believed his acting and sympathized with him due to how raw and real his emotions looked on camera. It must have been a very disheartening experience. With furrowed brows, Rain distressfully gazed at the teenage boy in front of her, who looked very hurt. "Yes, but I believe the rest of humanity will be able to move past this setback as long as we do our best to work together to have a peaceful world," 13 said. "A world where no one needs to suffer under the oppression of the Jins and Majins. The soldiers of the Alliance will risk their lives to make this happen. Those who don't share the same determination and conviction should not take part in our struggles. They will only be dead weights dragging everyone down. I am truly saddened that the Ashford and Stallard clan do not share our views and only came in the Rigel continent for show, even daring to disrespect our efforts in reclaiming the Rigel continent from the hands of the Jins and Majins." Rain seemed moved by Zion's words, her eyes teary as she said a few more words to console the teenage boy who looked genuinely downcast. Seth, who had watched everything from start to finish, almost coughed out blood then and there when the screen replayed the scene where he said, "Listen here, you brat." The camera had captured a burst of energy, which made the teenage boy wince, highlighting how Seth tried to harm the Supreme Commander of the Alliance in front of everyone. Soon, angry comments from the netizens exploded on social media and other platforms. All of them were bad-mouthing Seth and Alan, with some of them shouting that Seth must be punished for his attempted assault on Zion, which should be punishable by death. Right now, no one was more important in the Alliance than their Supreme Commander, so the punishment for Seth's attempt to harm him must be severe. "I don't know who is behind this, but it is too late to do anything," Aaron growled. "You better fix this now, or else." "Why, yes, sir." Seth, who knew how much was at stake, replied fearfully. "I will do my best to settle this as soon as possible." "Settle it now," Aaron said with finality, making Seth shudder. "Yes, I will," Seth answered. "I will go and find the Supreme Commander now." Just as soon as Seth left his quarters, he immediately came across Alan, whose face was just as flushed as his. Clearly, the other champion also received a good nagging from their patriarch, making him feel wronged. A glance was enough to tell them what they were supposed to do, so they hurried towards the Supreme Commander's quarters to ask for his audience. However, 13 knew that they would be coming for him, so he went to the Order of the Apocalypse to talk to Evavug and the newly born Brain Beetle, whom 13 had named Gwen. The teenage boy planned to use the baby Brain Beetle to cause some havoc on the battlefield, making sure that things would fall under his control. While he was away, Renz, who was watching the commotion from the top of the Dvalin Federation, chuckled after his subordinates reported Seth's and Alan's movements. "Time to play good cop and bad cop," Renz smirked as he left his quarters to talk to Seth and Alan. His plan was to make them dependent on him and think that he was their only ally in the Dvalin Federation. This was part of 13's scheme to let the two lower their guard and turn them into Renz's supporters during their stay in the Dvalin Federation. So you can only use your mind control on 2 people for now, correct? 13 asked for confirmation. Why, yes, the white-brained beetle, Gwen replied. Then can you mind control a throne? 13 asked. No, Gwen replied. At most, I can only control champions. Gwen had just hatched from its egg a few days ago and was forced to remain in the treasury of the apocalypse with its parent, Evavug. The 2 brain beetles were very wary of the teenage boy. However, they were in a place where they couldn't escape, so they could only stay wherever they were and meet the other party whenever he wanted. After the parent and child had a talk, Evavug deemed that cooperating with 13 would benefit Gwen more, giving his child a chance to grow. A white brain beetle was also known as the Overlord beetle. It got this moniker because it grew twice as fast as a regular brain beetle and was also twice as powerful. When 13 threatened Gwen that it would be absorbed by the black flag in his possession if it didn't cooperate, Evavug convinced the child to work hand in hand with the teenage boy. That way, it would at least have a chance at survival. Left with no choice, the rank 2 Overlord beetle since birth agreed to cooperate with 13 and became one of his beast companions. However, Gwen was only his beast companion in name. It wasn't like Tiona, Giga Chad, Rocky, Blackie, and Hercules, who were registered in his status page as his true beast companions. What is your maximum mind control range? 13 inquired. 2 miles, Gwen answered. Since it had just been born, it was still not strong enough to control more wanderers and dominate their minds. Currently, Gwen could only target 2 individuals who had the rank of champion and below. Although its mind control abilities were limited, it was still enough for what 13 had in mind. Understood. 13 patted the Overlord beetle, making it wince from his touch. As long as you cooperate with me, I'll make sure that you become stronger. Thank you, Master, Gwen replied. Evavug could only sigh in its heart. When it was still in the Rigel continent, it had already made big plans for its child. Unfortunately, those plans crumbled the moment 13 raided its lair and when it got betrayed by the Centipede King, Jalrog. Well then, Metatron, can you officially make Gwen my beast companion? 13 asked. But before Metatron could answer, Evavug interjected and asked the teenage boy if there was really a need for him to do that. She didn't doubt that Metatron could do what 13 requested. However, Evavug didn't want a child to become someone subordinate, believing that as long as there was an opportunity, Gwen could escape from their captor's grasp and become strong on its own. Unfortunately, the brain beetle was dealing with the wrong person. Like I said earlier, you only have 2 choices. 13 smirked at the white beetle in front of him. Either you become my beast companion, or you become part of my immortal parade of 100 demons. The choice is yours to make. I'll be your beast companion, Gwen replied in a heartbeat. The Overlord beetle knew that it would rather become its captor beast companion and grow strong rather than become part of the divine artifact that would seal its fate forever. Gwen believed that if it reached a high enough rank, it might be able to break free from becoming 13's beast companion. The chance was extremely small, but as long as there was a possibility, the Overlord beetle would rather cling to that small chance with every fiber of its being. I know what you're thinking, and frankly, I don't really care, 13 said. If you can really break free from my control, then go ahead. All I ask is that you listen to my orders and do it without fail. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Master, Gwen replied. Metatron then snapped his fingers, and a drop of blood escaped from 13's heart. This was a heart essence, which was a very strong type of bond between the Master and its beast companion. Metatron didn't believe that Gwen would be able to escape being 13's beast companion unless the teenage boy decided to free it on his own. When the connection between the 2 of them was finalized, Gwen's name finally appeared on 13's status page, making the Overlord beetle his newest subordinate. Well then, time for us to go, 13 said before shifting his gaze to Evavug. Seeing the brain beetle glare at him, the teenager thought of an idea and asked Metatron if it was possible. It's just a small thing, so why not? Metatron clapped his hands, and a giant TV appeared in front of the Birdman, Zed, and the Brain Beetle, Evavug. Feel free to watch dramas in Netflix, 13 stated. However, pay more attention to the news. You will see what's currently happening in the Rigel continent. So, make sure to enjoy the show. After saying those words, 13 returned to his room in Pangea, leaving the two kings of the Rigel continent behind. Only half a day had passed since the reinforcement from the Ashford and Stallard clan arrived in the Dvalin Federation, and yet, the news was buzzing with 13th's black propaganda. Aaron and Norman tried to fix their image using their own networks, but whatever they did was of no use. No matter how hard they tried to do some damage control, 13 was always 2 steps ahead of them, making sure that they didn't have a chance to defend themselves. Aside from his interview, the cute reporter from BBC, Rain, had also interviewed Lawrence, who is the Grand Marshal of the central government. Debates are fine, but insubordination will not be tolerated, Lawrence stated. We are all here under one banner, and that is to help protect humanity. Zion Levinas is our supreme commander, and his orders must be obeyed by everyone in the Alliance. Any factions who cannot follow their superiors' directives should not participate in any military activity, because it will only endanger everyone's safety. Those who cannot follow orders, no matter how strong, are a liability, not an asset. The most popular monarch in the world was none other than Lawrence. He was the only one who prevented the other monarchs from totally dominating the world. Because of this, the common people and the wanderers who weren't affiliated with the monarch clans and the prestigious families were inclined to join the central government and help safeguard the world from any abuse coming from these factions. His word was absolute. Now that he had spoken, no matter how Ashford and Stallard clan presented their case to play the victim, they would be unable to sway the will of the people. Because of this, Aaron and Norman ordered Seth and Alan to make a public apology and vow that they would no longer defy Zion's orders, even if they were ordered to kneel in front of everyone. Left with no choice, the 2 representatives of the Ashford and Stallard clan did as they were told and made a public apology. They admitted to their mistakes and apologized for their wrongdoings. Of course, 13 knew that there was not a single ounce of sincerity in their apology, so he gave them a second test. I still don't trust that any of you will be able to follow my orders, but since you apologized, I decided to give you all a second chance, 13 said as he faced the Ashford and Stallard army, whom he had commanded to stand in front of the flag of the Allied armies. All of you kneel, 13 ordered. Immediately, as if they had already been briefed beforehand, the 2 armies knelt in sync. Good. You will continue to kneel here for 2 days, 13 stated. All of you are wanderers, so not eating or drinking for 2 days will not kill you. This will prove to me that you are willing to obey my orders and truly become part of the Alliance. If you're unable to do this, then go home. We don't need those who don't share the same vision that we do. After saying those words, 13 left to conduct a meeting with the leaders of the Alliance, leaving the disgruntled Seth, Alan, and their armies behind. Wendell, who didn't like having the 2 hyenas in his territory, gave the teenage boy a thumbs up in his heart. The monarch of the Dvalin Federation was certain that after 2 days, the Ashford and Stallard clan would think twice before trying to use their influence in the Alliance's backyard. Inside the Dvalin Tower. With this, those 2 bastards will no longer be able to act arrogantly around here, Wendell said. Well done, Zion. 13 nodded with a smile. Thank you, Lord Wendell. I was also very annoyed by those pests. They don't share the same vision as us, yet they dared to trick the public and invite themselves into joining our operation without permission. I'm sure they have learned their lesson by now, Lawrence commented. But we still need to keep our guards up. We don't know when the 2 of them might stab us from behind. I'm quite impressed with your PR team, Zion. Trevor chuckled. Why don't you introduce them to me? They managed to shut Aaron and Norman up without giving them a chance to defend themselves. I'm sorry, Lord Trevor, but they have an exclusive contract with me, 13 replied. They will continue to work only for me until the northern regions are safe and secure. Trevor Remington nodded in understanding before shifting his gaze to Benedict, who was also seated within their round table. I've heard that you have bestowed Benedict a small Imperium mine. Is this true? Trevor asked. It is true, 13 replied. But didn't we all agree that all resources must be equally split between the Alliance? Trevor asked. Then why is he an exception? The members of the Aldebaran continent, as well as the central government, all shifted their attention to the teenage boy, who had a faint smile on his face. It's the price that must be paid in order to ensure that the arrogance of the Ashford and Staller clan would be brought down a peg, 13 replied. As you may already know, I forced Uncle Benedict to kneel in front of everyone. What I had asked of him was disrespectful, tasteless, and out of bounds. Uncle Benedict holds an important position within the Riggs family, and yet I trampled on his dignity and honor. It was something I shouldn't have ordered, but it had to be done. Compensating him for his loss is the right thing to do. The weight of his sacrifice cannot be measured in gold, so I gave him the next best thing. If Uncle Benedict hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been able to pull off what I did. Aside from that, making Lord Wendell and Lord Trevor kneel in front of everyone was out of the question. Not only would it lower morale, but might also cause problems within the Alliance. Even if I was willing to compensate them with the biggest Imperium mines in the Rigel continent, it would not be enough. Just in case anyone is wondering, I'm talking about mines that are as big as the Nazca mines. I would have been willing to offer that much to Lord Wendell and Lord Trevor if push comes to shove. Everyone in the room quieted down as they glanced at the two monarchs who both had calm expressions on their faces. However, deep inside, they were thinking that kneeling for a few seconds in exchange for something similar to the biggest Imperium mine that was currently being shared by the entire Alliance was worth it. Wendell lightly coughed before smiling at their supreme commander. If there's an opportunity to bring down the Ashford and Staller clan, I am willing to cooperate with you, Zion, Wendell said. I think you did the right thing by rewarding Benedict. That is indeed the proper way to compensate him for his sacrifice. I feel the same, Trevor commented. Do not hesitate to ask me for help next time. I will cooperate with you to the best of my abilities. The leaders inside the room could only shake their heads helplessly. They also wouldn't mind kneeling for a few seconds if an Imperium mine was involved. Imperiums were said to only form in places with high concentrations of Majins and Majins. This was why the Rigel continent was the best place to mine this precious ore. The Majins and Majins had inhabited the place for many years. Let's move on to our next agenda, 13 stated. I have decided to launch our next operation 10 days from now. Although it would be troublesome, we need to allow the Ashford and Staller clan to participate in the expedition. Wendell clicked his tongue, but he also understood that there were things that there was nothing he could do about, especially since everyone in the world was paying close attention to their operation. The only advantage we have is that the Ashford and Staller clan cannot ask for a big percentage of the spoils of war. Although I'm sure that many of you feel hesitant in letting them have a share of the pie, we have to look at the bigger picture. The teenage boy's words were firm, making everyone nod their heads in agreement. Our goal is to liberate the northern regions and come to a compromise with the Earth Dragons, 13 stated. As long as we are able to make them agree to a ceasefire agreement, we can shift our attention to the Cygni continent and prepare for another invasion. I hate to say this, but this is a fight against time, gentlemen. The sooner we end this war, the better. Is everyone in agreement? The leaders all nodded their heads, letting him know that they were on the same page as him. Good. 13 tapped his communicator, and a projection appeared at the center of the round table. Our drones have finally located the location of the Death Lord Erasmus. The Wyvern King is with him, but based on the images we received, it seems that Vanaroth has been turned into an undead wyvern. This is both good news and bad news for us. The good news is that its strength had diminished after becoming an undead monster. The bad news is that it is still a strong monster and shouldn't be underestimated. There are also no signs of the Wolf King and the Centipede King. They might be dead, but it's better for us to assume that both of them will also appear when the fighting starts. The teenage boy had no intention of telling anyone that the Wolf King was already dead and that he and the Centipede King had an agreement. 13 and Jalrog understood that both of them were only using each other for their own gains. Their alliance was not firm, so anything could happen during the battle. Please create as many Imperium-powered equipment as you can during that time, 13 said. We will be relying on those weapons for the time being because we are low on missiles and artillery shells. This will probably be our greatest battle as of late, and I hope that everyone is prepared to make some sacrifices. Everyone in the room understood that it was impossible to have no casualties during the war, so they had already prepared themselves for some sacrifices. After discussing a few more important matters, the meeting ended after 3 hours. 2 days later, Seth and Alan were finally relieved of their punishment and were allowed to eat, drink, and rest with their men. The two commanders did their best to keep a low profile as per the order of their monarchs. Although there was a bit of tension in the surroundings, the days passed swiftly because time waited for no one. Before everyone knew it, the entire army of the Allied forces once again mobilized in order to fight a war which would determine whether they could hold the territories they gained or die fighting for what they believed was right. After receiving the disciplinary punishment, the Ashford and Stallard army understood that the supreme commander of the alliance wasn't someone whom they could underestimate. The soldiers from both clans felt humiliated, believing that they were punished wrongly because of their superiors' actions. However, none of them dared to voice out their displeasure and simply prepared for the upcoming battle. 13 had placed these two armies on the left flank of the formation, wanting to see just how capable they were in battle. The military drones had located where the Jin army had congregated, and he planned to strike that location fast and hard. They were the bug army that was under the control of the rank 7 blister bug. Because of their fast reproduction rate, they were stationed on the front lines, serving as fodders to hold back the alliance for as long as possible. They weren't exceptionally strong, but they were quite numerous. Right now, the majority of the weapons being used by the alliance were powered by Imperium. These energy-based weapons were quite powerful, but very costly to use. Using them against the bugs would be a waste from 13's point of view, so he decided to use a different method. Team Alpha advance, 13 ordered. The aerial units of the Alliance that were high above the sky prepared to use their long-ranged abilities against the bugs. They didn't use any of their ammunition this time and solely relied on the mages who were blessed with elemental abilities. Their goal was to only stir the hornet's nest so that 13 could estimate just how many bugs were hiding under the ground. Just as expected, the moment the Alpha team started killing the low-ranking monsters on the surface, countless bugs emerged from the ground and took off to the skies in order to face them. The Alpha team hastily retreated as part of 13's plan. Their mission was to lure the enemy out of their hiding place and bring them to the location where the army lay in ambush. The sheer number of flying bugs in the sky was enough to block off the light of the sun, covering the surroundings in darkness. Unleash the flash fire missiles, 13 ordered. Immediately, the submarines of the Dvalin Federation fired a barrage from the sea, targeting the coordinates their supreme commander had designated. 50 missiles collided with the monster army, turning the sky into a blazing inferno and spreading the flames to the nearby monsters, which burned and incinerated some of them. The flash fire missiles created a wall of fire in the sky, which would last for half a minute before dissipating. This weapon was very effective in handling swarms of monsters both on the ground and in the sky. Unfortunately, the 50 missiles that the Dvalin Federation had used were the last batch of missiles in their stockpile. Even so, 13 didn't bat an eye as he ordered them to use the missiles against the bugs because it was the perfect counter for them. These kinds of monsters were very weak to flames, and their bodies burned easily. Even the blood of these insects was flammable, making the effect of the flash fire missiles even more intense, allowing it to spread in a wider range. Seth and Alan, who were watching from the left flank of the army, watched the blazing sky with a solemn gaze. After the initial surprise was over, countless flaming bugs passed through the wall of flames and flew in their direction. The majority of these monsters were rank 4 and above, and most of them had suffered moderate to serious injuries. Team Bravo, engage them as soon as they come within your firing range. 13 ordered. The armies of the Ashford and Stallard clan were part of Team Bravo, and all of them were armed to the teeth with the weapons and equipment that came from the Sirius continent. 13 wanted to know just how powerful their weapons were, so he decided to use this operation to see how effective they were in battle. "Show these bugs what we are made of," Seth shouted. "Open fire." The soldiers who were armed with rocket launchers locked on their targets and fired. The moment their rockets collided with the rank 4 monster, Christopher, who was paying close attention to the battle, noticed that the rockets exploded on the flying monsters' heads, making them explode and killing the monsters instantly. He immediately relayed this news to his young master, who was watching the battle from the rear of the army. "Not bad," 13 smiled faintly. "I guess they can pull their own weight." The Stallard army wasn't being idle either. Unlike the Ashford army, who had rocket launchers to use against the monsters that had managed to get past the wall of flames in the sky, they simply waited until their enemies came within their weapons' range and decimated them with their assault rifles. Those who managed to approach within 100 meters were dealt with personally by Seth and Alan, preventing the monsters from breaching their formation. "Team Omega, advance," 13 ordered after seeing that the left flank was stable. Arthur, Morris, and Stephen, who were the thrones of the Aldebaran continent, escorted the soldiers and led them to deal with the bulk of the bug army that couldn't fly in the sky. Since 13 didn't want to suffer many casualties, he ensured that the soldiers were protected by the thrones, who could deal with the biggest threat on land. While this was happening, Lawrence and Wendell attacked the blister bug together, preventing it from targeting their army. Tiona, on the other hand, was leading her immortal team of monsters and attacked the land bugs from the rear, disrupting their formation. Rocky, who was burrowing under the ground, carefully targeted the rank 5 and rank 6 monsters, making them fall into the sinkholes he had made, dealing with them swiftly and effectively. The bulk of the insect army was composed of rank 1 to rank 3 monsters. Their strategy was simple: swarm their enemies with overwhelming numbers from the land and the sky. This strategy used to be extremely deadly, especially with their leader, Evavug, leading the charge. Without the brain beetle, the bug army was merely a swarm of bugs that was a pain to deal with solely because of their numbers. A few hours later, the battle finally ended. Just like the high-ranking officers of the Alliance expected, there were no casualties due to the immediate response of the medics and the 69th Battalion, who had immediately taken the injured to the rear to get medical assistance, allowing them to fight another day. But just as everyone was about to take a breather, the military drones detected an army of undead monsters about to attack them from the left flank of their formation. However, the bad news didn't end there. Goblin riders and orc riders, all of whom were mounted on dire wolves, charged at the right flank of the army, attempting a pincer attack. Just as everyone was thinking that the situation couldn't possibly get any worse than that, the ground shook as if an earthquake was happening. A moment later, countless centipedes emerged from the ground and crawled toward the Alliance en masse. The centipede king, Jalrog, who hadn't been seen for a long time, finally appeared, leading its army into battle. But as if Murphy's Law was in full effect, a ferocious roar reverberated across the sky as the undead wyvern, Vanaroth, dove down from the heavens. Riding on its back was none other than the Death Lord, Erasmus, who served as the commander of the Majins and Majins, tasked by the Earth Dragons to deal with the pests that were trying to reclaim their territories. Just as the Alliance was thinking about what to do next after being surrounded by monsters on all sides, a calm voice sounded from their communicators, making them regain their composure. "Shift to Plan Z." As soon as the order was given, the soldiers retreated in haste, running as fast as they could. Their supreme commander had created different strategies for different situations, and Plan Z was one of them. When this plan was in effect, all the infantry on the ground would retreat in haste, while the monarchs, thrones, and Team Alpha would cover them from the land and sky. The naval fleet in the sea would then unleash all their long-ranged missiles, aiming at the locations their supreme commander would designate. 13, who was inside his Humvee located at the rear of the formation, ordered Colbert to retreat to the second line of defense, which he had prepared 2 days ago. The soldiers who were running away as fast as they could would occasionally turn their heads to the back to see what was happening behind them. They saw the 3 monarchs and the thrones, alongside the aerial units of the army, hold their ground, buying time for the army to retreat. Those who look back longer inevitably notice that the support fire coming from the sea only targeted the giant centipedes, the goblin riders, and the orc riders. The undead army was untouched, and this was also the monster that they were currently fighting. Jalrog and Erasmus eyed each other for a few seconds before they, too, joined their soldiers in battle. Monarchs, please deal with the Centipede King. Thrones, deal with the Death Lord. Team Alpha, support the ground forces as they retreat. Yes, sir. 13 remained calm as he gave orders left and right. Looks like I'm being underestimated, the Death Lord, Erasmus, said as he faced the thrones in the sky. Arthur, who was at the very front of the battle, clashed with the commander of the Majins. At the present, he was equipped with peak gold-grade armaments. He had no intention of letting the Alliance know that he owned mythical artifacts, knowing that it would cause a lot of trouble. Aside from Lawrence and Tristan, no one else knew that the patriarch of the Leventis family was in possession of armaments, which only the monarchs in Pangea were supposed to have. Unlike most of the monarchs, the thrones were all battle-hardened warriors, for they were the ones who usually fought on the front lines of every monster invasion. The thrones of the Dvalin Federation had fought together countless times, so their teamwork was impeccable. The thrones from the Aldebaran continent were the same, seamlessly dealing with Erasmus and his elite guards, who were protecting their liege. Meanwhile, on the ground, Lawrence, Wendell, and Trevor realized that the Centipede King was more powerful than they initially expected. Originally, they thought that fighting against the Centipede King with 3 monarchs was already overkill. However, after a minute of fighting, they understood that their opponent was incredibly strong. Jalrog, who was also surprised at how strong it was, laughed internally as it used the monarchs as training dummies to check the extent of its abilities. Lawrence was being pushed back, and Wendell, who acted as a support, didn't fare any better. If not for the fact that Trevor was there to support the two, one of them might have already been seriously injured after a few exchanges with the monster, who was now a pseudo-rank 9 sovereign. As the powerhouses of both sides clashed with each other, the undead warriors were closing the gap with the retreating infantry. The cover fire from the sea was only targeting the giant centipedes, the goblin riders, and the orc riders, so the undead was left untouched, allowing them to move unhindered across the battlefield. But just when they were only 100 meters away from the closest soldier running away from them, one of the skeleton soldiers stepped onto a mine, resulting in an explosion that blasted everything within a 10 square meter radius of the mine. Soon, more explosions spread on the battlefield as the enemy stepped into the killing zone that 13 had prepared in advance. While the stockpile of ammunition and missiles of the Alliance was at its lowest, the stockpile of landmines was left untouched. The locations of the mines were marked on the ground with a red spray. Before the battle started, the soldiers were already briefed on which path to take when an order to retreat was given. In fact, when they marched on the battlefield, they were asked to travel on this same route so that they could familiarize themselves with the path where they could make their escape. Seth, Alan, and their armies couldn't help but admit that this strategy was indeed a good method of simultaneous retreat and attack. While they were retreating to their second line of defense, the enemy's numbers were gradually being reduced by the minefield. Strikers, blow them to oblivion. 13 ordered. The tanks and artillery units, who were waiting for their turn to unleash hell, all bombarded the undead army with shells that blasted them to pieces. While this was happening, Lawrence contacted 13 directly and told him that they could no longer hold back the Centipede King. Monarchs, Thrones, and Alpha Team, retreat, 13 commanded. We will enter the second phase of the battle. After receiving their orders, the Monarchs and the Thrones immediately disengaged with the Centipede King, El, and the Death Lord, retreating to their second line of defense. Commander, we've run out of missiles, the Admiral of the Naval Army, Hugo Riggs, reported. We can no longer provide support fire. Thank you, Admiral, 13 replied. You've done enough. Since the cannons of the warships were unable to reach the location where the battle was happening, they used all the missiles in their stockpile. Even the missiles that belonged to the Ashford and Stallard naval fleet had been used up, making the warships unable to help their comrades who were risking their lives on land. With a support fire from the sea no longer a threat, the Jinn army surged like a tide toward the human army. Jalrog glanced at Erasmus, who was busy reviving the fallen monsters to add to their army, for half a minute before following his centipede army to the front lines. Since the Death Lord was mounted on the undead wyvern, Vanaroth, the centipede king deemed that the time wasn't right to show its true colors. For the time being, it would just play along with the Death Lord's plans to wipe out the Wanderers until the perfect opportunity presented itself. How is this possible? Seth couldn't help but look in disbelief at the scene that was happening in front of him. Right after he and his army safely retreated to their second line of defense, the undead army attacked them in swarms. However, despite their overwhelming numbers, the undead were unable to push forward. The reason for this was the great pillar of burning light that turned almost all undead who passed through it into ashes. Those who were able to pass through this barrier of light would continue to burn with holy flames, which left them disoriented. These lucky or unlucky undead would then be blasted by artillery and tank shells to oblivion, decimating them completely. "This is a miracle done by the Saintess," Marion muttered as she looked at Shauna, who was chanting while holding her staff. Behind her, 100 wanderers who also possessed holy magic were channeling their power to her, amplifying her spell. Behind this 100 wanderers was a mobile generator powered by Imperium. This equipment continuously supplied the wanderers and Shauna with ether, allowing them to keep the grand spell, Magnus Exorcism, active. While Shauna was doing her best to hold back the undead army, 13 was busy issuing orders from his Humvee. "Do not waste your ammunition on the undead behind the pillars of light," 13 ordered. "Only attack the ones that manage to get past it." The young man then glanced at the projection in front of him and saw the countless blinking dots that were about to merge with the undead army. "You sure are impatient," Jalrog, 13 muttered as he gazed at the centipede army that appeared on the battlefield. This was not part of his agreement with the Centipede King. "You're even willing to sacrifice your minions for this farce." The Centipede King wasn't supposed to appear in this battle. They had agreed for Jalrog to only appear when the Alliance had pushed deeper into the center of the Rigel continent, where the Earth Dragons resided. There, they would tag team against the weakened Erasmus, allowing the Centipede King to deal him the killing blow. "It seems that he's in a rush," 13 thought. "Well, it doesn't really matter. I also prepared for this kind of scenario." After tapping his communicator twice, the sound of whirring reverberated on the battlefield. Dozens of attack helicopters flew over the undead army and went past them. All of them were carrying some kind of container, which 13 planned to use at a later time. However, since Jalrog's centipede army posed a serious threat to the Alliance, the Supreme Commander of the Alliance no longer had the leeway to hold back. The moment the helicopters flew above the centipede army, the bottom of the containers opened, and the liquid stored within them was sprayed at the ground, drenching the centipede army. "What's that?" Alan, who was right beside Seth, asked. "I don't know," Seth replied. "We haven't been briefed about this." This strategy was something 13 had come up with before the commanders from the Ashford and Staller clan arrived, so it was only normal that they hadn't heard of it. Just in case Jalrog broke their agreement and used his centipede army to attack him, he would unleash a chemical weapon that specifically worked against insect-type monsters. This was one of 13's original concoctions, and he had asked his grandpa, Arthur, to have this made when he returned to the Aldebaran continent to pass over the dragon arm to Gerald. Arthur understood that this weapon could benefit the Leventus family better if it was kept a secret, so he made sure that only the people he trusted handled the process of its creation. This biological weapon was called No Bugs, No Life, and just like its namesake, it was incredibly effective against insect-type monsters. Although centipedes weren't really insects, but arthropods like spiders and scorpions, in 13's point of view, they were one and the same. They were all bugs that he could and would crush, so it didn't matter if they had 2, 4, 6, 8, or 100 legs. The moment the NBNL was sprayed over the centipede army, they started to thrash like earthworms sprinkled with salt. Toxic fumes rose up in the air as the spray landed on the centipedes and the ground, resulting in an orange mist that spread deep behind enemy lines. The wind was blowing behind the Alliance's army's back, so they weren't in any danger of being affected by the fumes. However, even from a distance, Jalrog could feel its senses tingle. With that alone, he understood that whatever weapon that the Wanderers were using, it was akin to poison to his army. The Goblin Riders and the Orc Rider, who had also merged with the Centipede army, weren't unscathed either. They cried out in pain after inhaling the toxic fumes, for it made their eyes water and their throat burn. Although it wasn't lethal to them, it was still a very painful experience, disorienting their forces. The wolves tripped over the giant centipedes that were thrashing on the ground, destroying their formation. Jalrog knew that the only way to overcome this obstacle was to order his army to dig underground. But just as he was about to give that order, a rock descended from the sky. Mounted on top of it was a blaze skunk, and sitting on top of that skunk was none other than Christopher. The rock maneuvered itself to turn at the last second, allowing the blaze skunks back to face the centipede army. "Fire in the hole!" Christopher shouted. At that exact moment, a flamethrower erupted from the backside of the blaze skunk, igniting the centipedes and setting them ablaze. Christopher's rock glided across the centipede army, covering them with hellish flames. Since the undead army refused to step forward, and the centipede army was right behind them, complete pandemonium took place. The rest of the Majins, who were supposed to reinforce their vanguards, didn't dare to step into the blazing inferno in front of them. Even though they were very far away from the blaze, the Wanderers still felt the heat of the flames, which was hot enough to make them sweat. A minute later, 13's order reached everyone's ears, snapping them awake from their trance. Retreat to the third line of defense. As soon as the order was given, the army once again distanced themselves from the hellish battlefield that was burning so brightly, even from a distance. "Did you see that, everyone?" One of the reporters who was at the scene shouted. Although the army is retreating, they have dealt countless casualties to the Jinn army. I've never seen something like this happen before. What do you think, Mike? The news anchor, who was in the studio located on the Sirius continent, answered the reporter's question. "Yes, I can see it, Bryce. Please be careful out there, and don't get too close to the battlefield." The news anchor named Mike replied before shifting his gaze to the person seated beside him. "I have here with me a retired military officer who has served in the army for nearly 40 years. Sir, what do you think of this strategy being used by the Supreme Commander, Zion Levinas?" The retired officer smiled before answering the news anchor's question. "Well, Mike, I will admit that this is also the first time I'm seeing such a strategy," the retired military officer who goes by the code name Blue Jay answered. "However, I will do my best to dissect what the Supreme Commander has just done." The people, who were tuned to the channel, waited with bated breath as Blue Jay explained what he thought of 13's strategy. "As far as I can tell, the strategy used by the Supreme Commander is a combination of hit and run and scorched earth tactics. From the very start, the army hadn't engaged the enemies in close combat, only using ranged attacks to fight them. When the enemy advances forward, they will strategically retreat. However, as they retreat, they make use of certain elements in the battlefield, allowing them to continuously kill their enemies and decrease the enemy's numbers." Blue Jay paused as the replay of the army retreating was displayed on the screen. They saw how the undead tried to run after the retreating soldiers. However, these monsters found themselves entering a minefield, blowing their vanguards and disrupting their formation. These gave the soldiers time to arrive at their destination. When the undead army finally managed to escape from the minefield, a pillar of light suddenly bloomed in front of them, turning them into ashes. As you can see, this kind of tactic is impossible to pull off unless it was prepared beforehand, Blue Jay explained. "I have every reason to believe that the Supreme Commander has anticipated this scenario, and thus implemented his counter against the enemy forces pursuing his troops." "Indeed." Mike nodded. "According to our reporter on the field, this spell is called Magnus Exorcism, and is being cast by none other than the Saintess Shauna Summers. Our reporter earlier also saw a generator behind her, which seemed to be supplying her with ether." "That's right," Blue Jay commented. With that setup alone, you can tell that this is already a planned counterattack. Now, those helicopters earlier used some kind of chemical to douse the giant centipedes, making them writhe and thrash. From that reaction alone, it seems that this chemical was made especially for them. Clearly, a lot of thought has been put into this strategy. Then the scene of how Christopher set the centipede army was shown, making the news anchor praise the young man for his boldness and bravery. That young man's name is Christopher Rotumbus, Mike stated as he read the information given to him by the staff. He is one of Zion Levin's captains, and there are rumors flying around that he is the Supreme Commander's right-hand man. This is the era of the next generation. Blue Jay smiled faintly. I'm finally able to retire in peace, knowing that there are new heroes who will lead the charge to create a brighter future for all of us. Indeed, Mike nodded. Now, the army is retreating for a second time. Do you think they will retreat a third time? I don't know, Mike, Blue Jay answered. While I think they might do it again, I am leaning more on the possibility that the Alliance will make their stand and hold the line. What makes you say that, Blue Jay? Just a gut feeling. Square root? Epsilon, upsilon. While the news anchor and the retired military officer discussed the possible strategies that Zion Levinis would make at this stage of the battle, the young man in question handed Shauna a soda can. The Saintess was currently riding in 13's Humvee because this was the safest place where she could rest after keeping the Magnus exorcism active earlier. Although the Imperium generator readily supplied them with ether, it didn't change the fact that it placed a lot of mental strain on keeping such a wide area of effect spell active. You did well, Shauna, 13 praised as the Humvee continued to move. You lasted longer than what I expected. It's the least I can do since everyone is doing their best, Shauna answered. How many have we killed? At least a third of the enemy forces, 13 replied. Erasmus still hadn't used his flying undead monsters. I'm sure he has a reason for not bringing them to the battlefield. Only a third. Shauna's face was pale from both exhaustion and the realization that they still hadn't killed half of the enemy forces. Yes, 13 answered. But although I said a third, in reality, we have killed more than half of their forces. Are you just teasing me? Shauna asked in disbelief. Of course not. 13 lightly tapped his communicator, showing the projection of the battlefield. Countless red dots were blinking on it, making Shauna frown. Have you forgotten? We are fighting against a Death Lord, 13 stated. Even if we killed the centipedes, as well as the other monsters assisting them, Erasmus can still revive them as long as the body is intact. This is why I decided to burn their bodies entirely. That way, nothing will be left behind. Also, since the undead are weak against fire, the skeleton soldiers, as well as the zombies under Erasmus' command, will also be destroyed in the process. It's a win-win strategy. Shauna nodded in agreement. However, the Centipede King makes me anxious. I heard that the monarchs weren't able to hold him back earlier. If they can't defeat Jalrog, we won't be able to win this war. 13 didn't affirm or deny Shauna's statement. He knew what Jalrog was aiming for, and the Centipede King might only be using him to prove to its allies that it was on their side. But, regardless of what the traitorous monster was thinking, 13 already had some contingency plans prepared. Now that they had reached their third line of defense, they could no longer turn back. This was the place where the Alliance would stand their ground and face the two kings of the Rigel continent, who were both the second last hurdle that they had to fight before facing the Earth Dragons. 13 knew that a lot was at stake in his decision, so he gave a mental order to Tiona, who was monitoring the battlefield from a safe place. Tiona summoned the flag and asked one of her subordinates to talk to the Centipede King and ask why it had broken their agreement. Depending on Jalrog's answer, 13 would enact one of his plans. He knew that he was dealing with a traitor, so he needed to know what the Centipede King was thinking to ensure that the one who would emerge victorious in this war was none other than him. Is this the effect of that spray earlier? Jalrog wondered to himself as he assessed the current situation around it. When the Centipede King and his army appeared on the battlefield, 13 asked Tiona to command the venomous parasites inside Jalrog's body to inject their venom simultaneously. during the time that it was undergoing its evolution deep underground. The venomous parasites hadn't been idle and busied themselves with incubating their eggs, increasing their numbers inside Jalrog's body. Due to their incredible birth rate, the Centipede King's entire body was already dominated by these hidden killers. The only reason why Jalrog still felt fine was because these venomous parasites were still on standby mode. But since it had made its appearance on the battlefield, 13 deemed that it was time to put his insurance in place and commence his plans. While Jalrog was starting to feel sluggish, it noticed a shadow blood wolf appear beside it. The wolf growled as it relayed Tiona's message to Jalrog. "Our agreement is still in effect," Jalrog replied to the wolf. "But the earth dragons were getting suspicious, so I had to make an appearance. Tell your master that this is now the perfect opportunity to do that plan. As long as the opportunity arises, I will keep my word." Having heard the Centipede King's reply, the wolf activated its perfect camouflage and disappeared. Tiona immediately relayed Jalrog's answer to her master, and the latter nodded in agreement. "Thank you, Tiona," 13 replied through their connection. "Go to Rocky and wait for my signal. We only have one chance." Tiona hissed in agreement and went to look for Rocky, who was hiding deep under the ground. Now that the Alliance had reached their third line of defense, 13 immediately contacted the Monarchs and the Thrones through the private line they had set up for special missions. "Please listen carefully," 13 said. "If everyone follows my orders, we might be able to end this battle today. What I want everyone to do is..." 13 explained the strategy that he had devised after hearing Jalrog's answer. Since the Centipede King wanted an opportunity, then he would grant its wish and serve it on a silver platter. "Are you sure about this?" Wendell asked. "I trust you. Believe me, I do. But this is quite sudden. Just how long have you?" "That's not important." 13 cut off Wendell's question because it would just lead to more trouble later on. "Just trust me. If you follow the plan, then we will win. If any of you become greedy, then we will definitely lose. I'm warning all of you. Stick to the plan or risk losing everything we've worked hard for. Let's trust our Supreme Commander," Lawrence stated. "However, Zion, we're going to risk our lives in doing this. I just hope that you don't take it lightly." "Of course, I'm not taking anyone's life lightly," 13 commented. "Feel free to take my life later if everything I said is false. I won't resist being executed by any of you. However, I cannot stress how important it is that you follow this plan to the dot. We only have one chance. If we fail, we will have no other opportunity. The Earth Dragons will also not sit idly, so we either win today or everyone packs up and leaves." A moment of silence descended on the private line before a sigh coming from Trevor Remington reached everyone's ears. "Let's do it," Trevor said. "But remember this, Zion. If any of us dies, you will pay for it." "Understood." 13 nodded. After 13 gave his orders, everyone moved into position. Shauna and Colbert, who were both listening to the meeting, couldn't help but feel a tingle run down their spines because they didn't expect that their Supreme Commander had formed a pact with their enemy. If people were to know about this, then things could get really bad really fast. Make sure not to tell anyone, okay? 13 placed a finger over his lips after he cut off the connection with the leaders of the Alliance. "This will be our dirty little secret." Shauna and Colbert both nodded their heads like a hen pecking rice. Though even if they said something to others, they had a feeling that no one would believe them. While the Allied army took a defensive formation and waited for their enemy to advance, the undead army and what remained of the Jinn army merged into one big horde of monsters. Jalrog and Erasmus moved together, leading their troops to battle. "We need to end this quickly," Jalrog stated. "These humans are no match for the two of us, so let's just charge at them together. I'm sure that they've run out of tricks." The Centipede King glanced at the sky, where the undead wyvern, Vanaroth, was leading the Death Lord's flying undead army in his stead. "I have a proposal," Erasmus stated. "Why don't we challenge their powerhouses in a duel?" "A duel?" Jalrog frowned. "Why? These humans must be expecting that we will charge at them all at the same time, so I'm wary of the strategy that they might use," Erasmus replied. "Since earlier, I've been feeling that something is wrong. It's as if we were being played at by someone. I hate that feeling the most. Jalrog pondered a bit before glancing at the human army in the distance. You want to challenge their powerhouses in a duel, so our enemy will not be able to use a strategy to defeat us? Is that it? Exactly, Erasmus nodded. I noticed that you're stronger now, so we won't have any problems if you, Vanaroth, and I fought them together. Wouldn't you agree? Jalrog chuckled internally because it was indeed stronger than before. In fact, the three monarchs were unable to hold it back for a long time earlier, so it was convinced that it would be able to defeat them after some time. Dealing with the strong ones is also good, Jalrog thought. I'm still feeling sluggish, so making the enemy lose morale after their leaders die is a good thing. The Centipede King also knew that without their armies, the battle would be less chaotic, allowing his helper to create opportunities for it. As if to prove that what it was thinking was right, the wolf it talked to earlier appeared beside it and nodded its head. Very well, Jalrog replied. Let's do that. Go and challenge them. Erasmus nodded and made his horse come forward, leaving his army behind. Hold your fire, 13 ordered as soon as he saw the Death Lord move alone. The Alliance watched the Death Lord walk close, while they held their weapons tightly. I challenge the monarchs and thrones of the human army, Erasmus shouted. Jalrog, my wyvern, and I will fight you together. Do you weaklings dare accept my challenge? The corner of 13's lips curled up into a smirk. Go and accept it, 13 said to Lawrence. It's time to end this battle once and for all. With Lawrence stepping up to accept the challenge, all the monarchs and the thrones moved to the center of the battlefield and faced the three kings of the Rigel continent. As long as they were able to win this battle, only the Earth Dragons would be left. 3 monarchs and 7 thrones versus the Centipede King, the Death Lord, and the Undead Wyvern King. This showdown would go down in the history of the Rigel continent and would be called the Battle of Kings. 13 left his Humvee and looked at the center of the battlefield with a calm expression on his face. The Saintess of the Alliance stood beside him as she looked anxiously at her father and grandfather, who were about to fight a duel. Can we win? Shauna asked. Seeing that she looked nervous, 13 reached out to hold her hand firmly, giving her strength. Don't worry, 13 replied. We will win. Hearing those words, Shauna felt a little better. She couldn't tell how he did it, but the teenage boy had a way of making her feel safe and secure. Jalrog, who thought that this was now the perfect opportunity to put his plan into motion, approached the center of the battlefield in anticipation. As long as he devoured Erasmus, he would finally be able to become a rank 9 sovereign. He was confident that he would be able to take down the Earth Dragons one by one. Once he defeated the 3 of them, he would become a Majin prince and finally become the true ruler of the Rigel continent. I never thought that I'd be asked for a duel in this day and age, Lawrence said with a smile. It seems that even the undead has a sense of chivalry. Chivalry is only for the righteous, Erasmus replied. So, are you saying you are righteous? Trevor inquired. Do I look righteous? Erasmus shrugged. Enough talk. Let's fight. The 3 monarchs were currently facing off against the Death Lord. On the other hand, the 3 thrones of the Aldebaran continent, including Tristan, were going to deal with the Centipede King. The 3 thrones of the Dvalin Federation would fight against the undead wyvern. Jalrog snorted after looking at the weaklings who were going to fight him. However, he soon realized that this lineup might be thanks to his helper within the allied army. It will be easier to shake off these guys because they are weaker, Jalrog thought. Those monarchs will be able to push Erasmus to his limit. As long as he uses his trump card, I will no longer need to fear him. Even with his current strength, the Centipede King didn't dare to attack the Death Lord at this point in time. The reason for that was due to Erasmus' weapon, Reaper's Death Scythe. This was a weapon that ignored defense and dealt true damage to whoever it hit. This meant that Jalrog's extremely hard exoskeleton was useless, for the Reaper's Death Scythe was a weapon that could seriously wound it. As long as that weapon was in Erasmus' hand, the victor between the 2 of them was still undecided. Since you want to be chivalrous, then let's do this properly. Lawrence took out a gold coin from his pocket and placed it over the back of his thumb. The moment this coin lands, we start our battle, agreed? Sounds good. Erasmus nodded. Do it. Lawrence didn't even think twice and tossed the coin high up in the air. A strange calmness descended on the battlefield as they waited for the coin to fall onto the ground. It was as if time had slowed down drastically, with everyone paying close attention to the coin, which was slowly going downward. The moment the coin hit the ground, the Wanderers and the Majins clashed with each other. Despite facing 3 monarchs, Erasmus was calm as he fought against Lawrence, and Wendell in close combat. Trevor was supporting them by firing holy arrows, which was one of the weaknesses of the undead. Jalrog, who was fighting against the 4 thrones, had the leeway to observe the Death Lord, and came to a shocking discovery. This bastard, he is hiding his true strength. Jalrog cursed internally. Since there had been no opportunity to see the Death Lord fight on the battlefield, the Centipede King thought that Erasmus was weaker than him. But now that he saw him in battle, he understood that the king of the undead army was a pseudo-rank 9 sovereign, just like him. Because of this, Jalrog's desire to devour Erasmus only grew. It also noticed something quite peculiar with its opponents, making it laugh internally. They are already weak, and yet they're not fighting me seriously, Jalrog thought as it deflected Tristan's attack with its razor-sharp legs. Maybe this is part of my supporters' agreement. The Centipede King then glanced at the battle in the sky, where Vanaroth was being pushed back by the 3 thrones that it was fighting. After becoming an undead, the Wyvern King had weakened considerably and could no longer show the might that it possessed when it was still alive. Because of this, the thrones from the Dvalin Federation were able to have the upper hand in their battle in the sky. Then at the corner of its eye, Jalrog saw Erasmus miscalculate the strength of the blow of its opponent. Lawrence had activated a temporary boost in his strength and swung his sword with all of his might, breaking the Death Lord's stance. Wendell didn't miss this opportunity and followed up with an attack, forcing Erasmus to go into the defensive. The monarch's blow broke the Death Lord's defenses because Lawrence had broken its stance earlier, making it unable to gain a proper footing. The blow opened up Erasmus' defenses, which Trevor didn't plan on waste. Sunbeam. A blinding flash of light blasted from the tip of Trevor's staff and hit the Death Lord's chest dead center. The blow sent Erasmus flying, making him drop his death scythe from his hands. At the same time that Erasmus was hit, Jalrog was already on the move. The Centipede King's sudden burst of speed allowed him to cross the gap between himself and the Death Lord, who was now about to crash on the ground. With mere seconds separating them from each other, the Centipede King opened its jaws, intending to bite off the Death Lord's head from its body. And in that brief moment, Jalrog's and Erasmus' gaze intersected with each other. Time seemed to slow down as the 2 kings of the Rigel continent looked into each other's eyes. The Centipede King's gaze was filled with killing intent. However, instead of seeing panic, anxiety, or despair in the Death Lord's eyes, what Jalrog saw was ridicule. Just as Jalrog was wondering why its prey was looking at him like that, it suddenly felt a burning pain at the side of its head. Before it could realize what was happening, it crashed down on the ground, screaming in pain. Lawrence, who was holding Erasmus' death scythe, grunted because he hadn't been able to completely sever Jalrog's head from its body. The scythe only managed to cut halfway, failing to land the killing blow. However, that was enough. Arthur had activated his overdrive skill, which was part of his Heaven's Blade martial technique. This skill increased his strength and speed by 500%. With a roar similar to a clap of thunder, the patriarch of the Leventis family swung his sword and finished what Lawrence had started. As the Centipede King's head was severed from its body, only one thought appeared inside its head. It had been betrayed by the person who had asked it to form an alliance with it. Those were the last words in the Centipede King's mind as the light in its eyes disappeared. It was also the end of its ambition of becoming a Majin prince who would subjugate the world of Pangea and make the Wanderers and the humans who lived in it its playthings. Wendell watched as Arthur dealt the final blow and cleanly cut off Jalrog's head from its body. The Centipede King, who was one of the kings that had terrorized his army several years ago, had finally been slain. The moment the giant centipede's body crashed to the ground, the monarchs and the thrones finally broke out of their trance. Their gazes then landed on the Death Lord, who was currently being surrounded by them. If it's now, we can kill him, Wendell thought. An opportunity like this won't come again. It was not only the monarch of the Dvalin Federation who thought this way. Everyone, including the allied army who was watching the battle from a distance, felt the same way. But just as they were about to act on their impulse, a firm and unwavering voice reached their ears. "Everyone, stop and stand your ground." 13's shout spread across the entire battlefield as he broadcasted his order through the channel connected to everyone on the battlefield. "I repeat, stand your ground," 13 declared. "Nobody moves if you don't want to die." The teenage boy, the supreme commander of the Alliance, shouted with all of his might, making even the monarchs hesitate to attack the lone Death Lord whom they had surrounded. "Do not forget our goal." 13's voice once again rang through everyone's communicators. "It is to ensure that the northern regions will remain safe from any threats. This is the first step to make that happen, so don't *CK it up." Erasmus, who had heard 13's orders through the communicators of the people around him, glanced at the teenage boy standing on top of his Humvee. He stared at him for a few seconds before raising his hand. The Reaper's death scythe that was on Lawrence's hand turned into a red mist and reappeared in the hand of its rightful owner. After regaining his weapon, Erasmus casually walked to the fallen Centipede King and raised his hand. "Arise," Erasmus ordered. Immediately, tendrils of blood and flesh reached out toward Jalrog's severed head and reconnected it with its body. The undead Centipede King screeched loudly before bowing to its master, who then jumped on top of its head. Without another word, the Centipede King turned around to charge at the Djinn army, who had now started to massacre each other. Erasmus' undead army attacked all the other Djinns who were still alive. The giant centipedes, the goblin riders, orc riders, and the remnants of the bug army, as well as the other Djinns that belonged to the other kings who had already perished in the war. The undead wyvern, Vanaroth, led its flying legion to annihilate those who had tried to escape. They didn't plan to let anyone leave the battlefield alive, for Erasmus could only trust them if they were dead. Soon enough, they would become part of his legion. "Are you seeing this, everyone?" the reporter from BBC shouted. "The Djinns are fighting against each other. They are killing each other." The monarchs and thrones, as well as the rest of the Alliance, didn't know how to react as the army that they should be fighting was being massacred one-sidedly. With 2 undead kings under his command, Erasmus only needed to watch and wait until everything was over. From the very start, the undead army had already encircled the remainder of the Djinn army and was only waiting for their master to give their orders. And now that the order to kill had been given, the ending was already set in stone. Half an hour later, the battle finally ended, and Erasmus once again mounted his Death Knight. "Zion Leventis, you have kept your word," Erasmus said through telepathy, which was heard by the entirety of the Alliance. "So I will keep mine. Come with me, and I'll take you where the Earth Dragons are. Whether you're able to convince them or not will depend on your luck." 13, who was standing on top of the Humvee, nodded. "Renz, you will be the temporary leader of the Alliance while I am away," 13 ordered. "Take everyone back to the command post we have established and wait for my return. Until then, no one must leave the base without permission." "Understood," Renz replied through the communicator. "Be safe, Commander." Just like everyone else, Renz had no idea how the teenage boy had been able to make the Death Lord cooperate with him. The only thing that mattered was that he succeeded, and the Alliance had finally triumphed over the kings of the Rigel continent, leaving only one of them left standing. "Sound the horns of victory," 13 ordered. "Raise the colors." As soon as the order was given, the booming sounds of horns spread on the battlefield. The flag bearers of each army waved their flags, signaling that the battle was finally over. Once everyone finally understood that the battle was truly over and that they had emerged victorious, a resounding cheer erupted among the soldiers' ranks, spreading like wildfire. Through all this, 13 smiled and ordered Christopher to take him to where Erasmus was. His right-hand man summoned his rock and allowed his master to ride its back with him. "Should I accompany you?" Arthur asked through the communicator. No, 13 replied. Negotiating with the Earth Dragons will be a dangerous task. We can't risk angering them at this point in time. Arthur wanted to argue, but in the end, he gave up. Just be careful, Arthur stated. If they don't want to negotiate, go back as soon as you can. Understood, 13 answered. When Christopher's rock arrived where the undead army was, Erasmus waved his hand and ordered his undead legion to retreat. The monarchs and the thrones only watched with solemn gazes as they watched them leave. There were many questions they were itching to ask the boy, but he said that he would give them the answers they wanted once he returned. Arthur, you sure are lucky to have Zion as a grandson, Trevor said with a smile. Now, how about we matchmake him with my granddaughter, Leah? Since her parents and his parents were all best friends, they would be a perfect match. Don't you think so? Arthur only snorted before walking back to the Levinus army. Trevor watched him go with a faint smile on his face before shifting his gaze to Wendell. Congratulations, Trevor said. Looks like the sacrifices that you and your people had made for the past few years finally bore fruit. Wendell, who didn't realize that he was clenching his fists so hard, glanced at his friend and nodded in agreement. It's not yet over, Wendell replied. There are still the 3 Earth Dragons. If Zion is unable to convince them for a peace treaty, we will have no choice but to fight them again. Don't even joke about that part, Lawrence chuckled. I don't mind fighting rank 8 sovereigns, but rank 9s are off limits. Those Earth Dragons are so tough, and I don't want to be anywhere near them. True, Trevor commented. I think only Erasmus Reaper Death Scythe can cut through their defenses. I just hope that he is really on our side. Everyone nodded their heads in agreement. They still didn't know if the Death Lord was an enemy or not. The only thing they knew was that Zion, who seemed to have formed a connection with Erasmus and reached an agreement with him. As to what that agreement was, they just hoped that the teenage boy didn't sell them out because none of them wanted to have their supreme commander as their enemy. Several weeks before the Allied forces launched an operation to reclaim the northern regions. After 13 had talked to the Centipede King and formed an alliance with it, he also visited another king of the Rigel continent, which was Death Lord Erasmus. Through Zed's and Evavug's story, he had gotten familiar with the Death Lord and thought that there was a possibility to come to a compromise with him. The teenage boy understood that the Centipede King wasn't the most trustworthy of monsters, given that it readily betrayed Evavug so that it could raise its ranks. From the start, he and Jalrog both knew that their alliance was only a way to achieve their goals. Once these goals had been met, the agreement they had could easily be broken. 13 didn't want to put all of his eggs in one basket, so he reached out to the Death Lord under the cover of darkness. I didn't expect that I would be having a guest tonight, Erasmus said as he glanced at the Magma Balboa who had risen up from the ground. Which faction do you belong to? Rocky growled a bit and answered no one, which made the Death Lord look at it with amusement. Although the Magma Balboa was a rank 7 monster, it posed no threat to him whatsoever, so he didn't make any move to attack it. So, why did you come here? Erasmus inquired. Do you wish to become my subordinate? Rocky shook its head before opening its mouth. I have come to speak with you, Lord Erasmus. A robotic voice answered. 13, who was covered from head to foot with metallic armor, emerged from Rocky's mouth. Erasmus tried to gauge the stranger's strength, but no matter how much it tried to appraise him, it could feel nothing. Who are you? Erasmus asked. You may call me 13, 13 replied. Suddenly, the Death Lord's deathly aura exploded from its body, making Rocky shudder. 13, thoroughly protected by his armor, was unaffected by it. However, he ordered Rocky to escape as soon as he gave the signal to dig underground. You want me to call you 13? Erasmus asked in a teasing tone. It seems that you're trying to make me angry. Stop hiding behind that suit of armor. If you do not obey, I will cut you down before this monster can even escape. As if to prove that he wasn't lying, a bone prison emerged from the ground, trapping Rocky inside of it. Do not test my patience, Erasmus said as he held his death scythe, which had started to glow bright red. You only have one chance to live, so don't waste it. Sensing that the Death Lord seemed unaffected by Metatron's aura that had temporarily coated his armor, the teenage boy weighed his options. A few seconds later, a sigh escaped his lips before he deactivated his armor and appeared in front of the Death Lord, unprotected. Seeing the true face, as well as the race of the person talking to him, an amused chuckle escaped the Death Lord's lips. A child, Erasmus chuckled before snapping his fingers to destroy the bone prison that had trapped Rocky in a cage. This is no place for a rookie. Go back to where you came from while I'm still being nice. 13 stared long and hard at the Death Lord before deciding to take a gamble. Earlier, you reacted when I told you that my name is 13, 13 said. Why? It's because that name belonged to a friend, Erasmus replied. You're lucky, child. You were this close to being sliced in half earlier. 13 felt his heart beating wildly inside his chest as he carefully looked at the Death Lord, who was casually sitting on a throne made up of bones. Valifor's mane, Paimon's crown, Warhorse Oroba, Mephistopheles' sword, Hygiene's wings. 13's voice almost sounded hoarse as he recognized the cursed artifacts that the Death Lord possessed. Don't tell me. Erasmus, who initially intended to ignore the boy, suddenly raised his hand. Before Rocky could even react, his master was already in the Death Lord's grasp. How did you know? Erasmus's eyes that were glowing like red embers stared at the boy who was only centimeters away from his face. Who are you? 13. 13 said as his vision started to blur due to tears that suddenly appeared in his eyes. Is that you, Cassiel? Are you really Cassiel? The teenage boy wasn't someone who would cry easily. Even if he were to be tortured and beaten up, not a single tear would come out from his eyes. But there were simply individuals who were able to bring out a strong reaction from him. And they were none other than the very people who made him defy his father, the system god. The Death Lord looked at the teenage boy, whose tears were falling from his face, and narrowed his eyes. Are you really 13? Erasmus asked icily. Never mind. I'll just kill you and personally ask your soul. Just as he was about to stab the teenage boy with his cursed sword, Mephistopheles, 13's words reached his ears. I don't have a soul, 13 replied. I never had one. Systems don't have them. Erasmus paused after hearing the teenage boy's reply. When you were 16, you got rejected by Sherry. 13 smiled faintly as tears continued to fall from his eyes. She said that she doesn't like to spend the rest of her life with a loser like you. A year later, she returned and tried to smooth things over with you after you single-handedly defeated a rank 5 sovereign despite being only of the master rank. You found the cursed artifact, Valifor's mane, when you were searching for a ruin. It has the power to remove your sense of touch. You were very annoyed with it because you can't get your beep up because you can't feel any sensation while you beep the brothel girls. When you turned 18, well, things became messy because you accidentally groped the high priestess. Okay, you can stop now, Erasmus interjected as he released the boy from his grasp. But just as 13 was about to lose his balance and fall off from the hill made up of bones, a pair of cold hands wrapped themselves around his body and gave him a hug. Erasmus didn't say anything and simply held the boy whom he could easily crush in his arms. 13, on the other hand, hugged him back and cried on his chest. He never thought that he would see one of his hosts in this manner. When Cassiel died, 13 tried to bring his soul to the cycle of reincarnation. This was the only thing he could do for his hosts to make sure that they would safely cross over to their next life. But when he was about to do that, his host's soul suddenly disappeared without a trace. 13 had wanted to look for Cassiel's soul, but he didn't have the power to do it. In the end, he decided to ask his father for help, but the system god only said that it was the will of fate. Perhaps that was also the last nail in the coffin that made 13 hate the goddess of fate to his very core. It was what triggered him to rebel, hating how fate toyed with the lives of mortals who were only doing their best to live their lives to the fullest. And now, the soul he hadn't seen for 300 years was finally in front of him. But Cassiel was no longer part of the living. He was now Death Lord Erasmus, one of the kings of the Rigel continent, and he was born for one thing and one thing only: revenge. A soul that had been corrupted and reborn as an undead skeleton warrior, who had killed ceaselessly in order to raise his rank. A monster born out of pure hate and malice toward the people who had betrayed his trust. 13. Let's talk, Erasmus said. Tell me why you have come to see me. The teenage boy nodded and told the Death Lord about the reason for his visit. From beginning to end, Erasmus only listened. He didn't say anything until his old friend, who had supported and accompanied him until his dying breath, said everything he had to say. I will cooperate, but on one condition, Erasmus stated. Aaron's head. I want it, and I shall give it to you, 13 replied. But not now. You also understand, right? Erasmus reluctantly nodded his head before resting his hand on the teenage boy's shoulder. So, what do you have in mind? Erasmus asked. Knowing you, you can easily make a plan, right? 13 nodded. With you here, I think I can come up with a good plan. Also, I have a proposal to make. I'm all ears. Erasmus smirked. What are you cooking right now? 13 smiled faintly. Something that you will like very much. A laugh escaped the Death Lord's lips, which spread across his domain. The skeleton warriors under his command all rose up from the ground and formed their ranks, ready to obey their master's will. 13 glanced at the undead army around him and chuckled alongside his host, who would become his strongest ally and whom he could trust his back. A person who would never betray him even if the world turned its back on him. The two talked till dawn and brainstormed about how they would be able to cooperate with each other without anyone knowing that they had formed an alliance. An alliance that would not only pave the way for the victory of the Wanderers in the Rigel continent, but also set the foundation of the revenge that Erasmus had dreamed of for the past 300 years as an undead monster. The Rigel continent wasn't a small continent, and it was even bigger than the Aldebaran continent. This was also the reason why many efforts have been made to reclaim it. So almost everyone around the world was watching it, including a young lady with long blonde hair and blue eyes. She was lying in bed, surrounded by servants who made sure that she had everything she needed while watching the television. Human technology is such a wonderful thing, one of the young lady's servants said. Even though the Rigel continent is so far away, we can watch things happen live. Indeed, another servant nodded. Especially that boy, Zion Leventis. He's so young, and his ability supersedes everyone. Maybe we should eliminate him while we still can. However, before someone could answer their question, a chilling voice reached their ears, making their body subconsciously shudder. Did I give the two of you permission to talk in my presence? The two servants hurriedly kneeled and begged for mercy. Mistress, forgive us. We overreached our stations. Have mercy, we beg you. The young lady, who seemed to be around Zion's age, clicked her tongue and ordered the two servants to stand up and remain silent. A moment later, a knock on the door sounded, making the young lady's face scrunch up. Who is it? It's me, Lady Siri. Come in, Roxy. A beautiful lady with long blue hair entered the room and glanced at the 150-inch flat-screen TV that had been recently installed inside their residence. Did the Alliance lose? Roxy asked, since the only thing she could see right now was a commercial. No, the young lady named Siri replied. They have just defeated the Brood Mother, and the rest of the Jinn army, led by the Wolf King, are retreating. What? Roxy looked at her mistress in confusion. They won? The Alliance won? Yes, Siri replied with a smile. I won our bet, Roxy. You're going to make me that pudding I ate last night. No going back on your word. Okay. Roxy thought that Siri was only pranking her. When the commercial was finally finished, the reporters once again started discussing the aftermath of the battle. Smoke was rising on the battlefield, but countless charred monster corpses could still be seen in the surroundings. The cheering of the soldiers echoed in the background, which forced Roxy to admit that she had indeed lost her bet with her mistress. But how? Roxy asked. How did they do it? We thought that the humans will need at least 20 more years to reach the rank that they require to defeat the Jinns of the Rigel continent. They have a capable commander, Siri replied. He made it possible. The frown on Roxy's face deepened as the face of the Supreme Commander of the Alliance appeared on the screen. Sir, you have achieved something that many thought impossible, the beautiful reporter, Rain, said with a smile. Can you share with us your thoughts and what you think is the reason why the Allied armies won this battle? They're just rank 8 sovereigns, Zion Leventis replied. It's not a big deal. Wow, did you hear that, guys? Rain's bright eyes looked straight at the camera. The Supreme Commander said that rank 8 sovereigns are not a big deal. Well, he's not wrong, Siri commented with a smile. Isn't that right, Roxy? Roxy was still frowning, but in the end, she smoothed out her expression and nodded her head. Yes, rank 8 sovereigns are not a big deal, Roxy answered. It seems that the pace of the advancement of the Wanderers had sped up a bit. I should report this to your mother, my lady. Siri casually waved her hand as if shooing the blue-haired beauty out of her room. Don't forget my pudding, Siri shouted just before Roxy was about to leave the door to ensure that she wouldn't have any excuses later. Siri's gaze locked on the teenage boy with wavy black hair and green eyes, who was oozing with confidence. I wonder what he will taste like, Siri muttered as she narrowed her eyes. Well, it's just the first victory. I'm sure that the Djinns of the Rigel continent are not stupid. They will definitely mount a powerful counterattack and exterminate those Wanderers. Siri yawned before closing her eyes to sleep. It was already 2 in the morning, and she had been watching the live broadcast since lunchtime. Although she found 13's commanding abilities very impressive, she believed that the second battle wouldn't be as easy. But after a few weeks, the young lady and her steward had agape mouths as they looked at the TV. If their eyes weren't tricking them, it seemed that the Centipede King's head had just been cut off from its body. They then watched as the Death Lord casually turned his former comrade into an undead and mounted its back. They also didn't expect that Erasmus' undead legion would attack their allies, not letting any of them escape alive. He betrayed the Djinns? Roxy stuttered. Technically, he was betrayed first when Jalrog attacked him without warning. Siri, who was just as shocked as her steward, regained her composure faster and answered Roxy's question. Still, I can't believe that he sided with the humans, Roxy stated. I thought the Djinns and Majins of the Rigel continent were a united army. It seems that their long-time stay in the Rigel continent had weakened their resolve. Siri pondered a bit before offering her opinion. Maybe he and the Alliance have reached a compromise? Siri asked. I mean, it's not unheard of for Djinns and Majins to form a mutual benefit relationship with humans. You're not wrong, mistress, Roxy stated. I just didn't expect that this would happen in the Rigel continent. While the two were guessing the real reason why Erasmus decided to join with the humans, the Death Lord's voice reverberated from the surround speakers inside Siri's room. Zion Leventis, you have kept your word, Erasmus said through telepathy, which was heard by the entirety of the Alliance. And I will keep mine. Come with me, and I'll take you to where the Earth Dragons are. Whether you're able to convince them or not would depend on your luck. It's really happening. Roxy's expression became solemn. Will those Earth Dragons really compromise, or is this just a trap they have set to capture Zion Leventis? He better not do anything funny. Siri glared at the Death Lord on the screen. I already marked him as my prey. Calm down, my lady. This is just speculation on our part. Maybe they will really reach an agreement with the humans. Tisk. Siri locked her gaze on the young man who was standing on the Humvee with a calm expression on his face. Maybe it was because they were of the same age that she felt some sense of rivalry against the teenage boy who had led the Wanderers to 2 consecutive victories. Also, if his talks with the Earth Dragons really bore fruit, then for the first time since the Djinn invaded Pangea, the humans would have officially had managed to secure a victory that no one expected to happen. Roxy, tell Mother that I have made a decision, Siri declared. Young lady, do you mean? Roxy looked at her spoiled miss in disbelief. Yes, I am going to Solterra after the war of the Rigel continent has concluded, Siri stated. I want you to prepare for my departure. Make sure that everything is ready. Do you understand? Why, yes, my lady, Roxy stuttered. I'll inform your mother at once. Good. Siri smiled sweetly. I'll show him that what he can do, I can do better. The servants inside the room shuddered uncontrollably as their mistress' gaze landed on their bodies. Those weren't the eyes of a teenage girl. Those were the eyes of a predator who had already found her next prey.